In the frozen hills of Montana, a retired Navy SEAL came to save a flock of sheep. But the hardest rescue waiting for him was not in the snow. It was standing beside a one-legged rancher who refused to be treated as broken. His German shepherd, Echo, understood what people often forget. Loyalty does not always pull. Sometimes it simply stays close, quiet, and ready. Before the storm ended, a brother's betrayal, a hidden danger, and one old barn would test them all. If this story touches your heart, tell us where you're watching from, leave your thoughts, and like and subscribe to help us reach 5,000 subscribers so we can keep sharing stories like this. Winter did not simply arrive in Briar Pass, Montana. It descended like an old god, placing one heavy hand over the valley and ordering every living thing to become still. Snow covered the sheep fields until the fences looked half drowned, their wooden rails rising from the white like the ribs of some buried creature. The road along the Absaroka foothills had vanished under wind-packed drifts. Even the pines seemed to bend their heads, not in defeat exactly, but in respect. In Briar Pass, storms were not weather. They were visitors with ancient tempers. Grant Michaels heard the call just after noon. He was in the small mountain rescue garage behind the old fire station, tightening a cracked bracket on a snowmobile trailer. At 49, Grant still moved with the quiet economy of a man trained to waste nothing, not motion, not breath, not words. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and solid in the way of men who had carried weight for so long that their bodies stopped complaining and simply became part of the burden. His olive combat shirt fit close through the chest, the camouflage sleeves worn soft at the elbows. Dark bands circled the upper arms, faded from years of use. When he reached for the radio, the sleeve tugged back just enough to show the edge of an old Navy SEAL tattoo on his right arm, the ink no longer sharp, like a flag left too long in mountain sun. "Grant," came the dispatcher's voice through static. "Whitcomb Ranch has sheep loose near the North Wind Cut. Big rescue truck can't get past mile marker 6. Road's iced over bad." Grant looked toward the open garage door. Outside, the sky had turned the color of cold iron. "How many head?" he asked. "Unclear. Ines says a section of fence went down. Could be 12, could be 20. Visibility's poor." At the mention of Ines Whitcomb, one of the younger volunteers in the garage looked up from a toolbox. She asked for help? The question carried more than curiosity. Everyone in Briar Pass knew Ines Whitcomb did not ask easily. Some said she was proud enough to argue with thunder. Others said the mountain had tried to break her once and failed, and ever since then she had treated sympathy like a trespasser. Grant did not answer the young man. He only reached for his orange and black rescue jacket. A German shepherd rose from the corner before Grant called him. Echo had been lying on an old wool blanket beside the heater, though lying was not quite the word. Echo rested the way a watchman rested, body still, ears listening, mind half in the room and half in the world beyond it. His coat was black across the back, golden along the legs and chest, thick enough that snow rarely reached his skin. A pale streak of fur marked his forehead, like a small crooked flash of lightning leaning toward his left eye. One ear stood clean and sharp. The other carried a small notch along the edge, a scar from some earlier winter that Echo had survived without ever feeling the need to tell the story. Grant clipped the dark leather collar, checked the small triangular tag, and fastened the orange reflective tab beneath it. Echo looked at him once. Not eager, not excited, ready. "That dog know it's miserable out there?" the young volunteer muttered. Grant pulled on his gloves. "He knows before we do." The first half-mile out of Briar Pass was merely unpleasant. After that, the storm removed all manners. Wind struck the rescue truck broadside hard enough to make the frame groan. Snow came sideways, then upward, then in mad spirals that erased the hood ornament and the road beyond it. Grant drove slowly, one hand steady on the wheel, the other resting near the radio. Echo sat in the passenger footwell, braced and silent, his eyes fixed through the windshield as if reading white scripture only dogs remembered how to read. At mile marker 6, the plowed road ended. A drift had folded across the pass, high and hard, shining blue beneath the loose snow. The larger rescue rig would never make it beyond that point. Grant parked tight against the lee side of a stand of pines and killed the engine. For a moment there was only the storm pressing against the glass. Grant sat still. There had been a time when silence before action meant briefing rooms, maps, voices low and clipped, the strange calm before men stepped into places that did not forgive mistakes. He had left that life behind, at least on paper. These days his missions involved lost hikers, frozen engines, broken roofs, frightened animals, old people trapped behind snowbanks. But his body did not always know the difference. A call was a call. Someone was out there. Something needed bringing home. Echo gave one soft breath through his nose. Grant looked down. "Yeah," he said. "I heard it too." There were no sheep sounds yet. No bells, no bleating, only the storm and somewhere beneath it, the faint restless pressure of life trying not to disappear. He stepped out into the wind. Snow bit at his face instantly. He pulled his hood tighter and moved to the rear of the truck for his pack, rope, thermal blanket, fence marker flags, and a compact emergency kit. Echo jumped down after him, landing lightly despite the depth of snow. The dog lowered his head, sniffed once, then turned not toward the road, but toward the north wind cut, a long, shallow ravine where gusts funneled hard enough to scour the ground, bare in places and bury it chest-deep in others. Grant followed. The world narrowed to white, gray, breath, and the dark shape of Echo ahead. They found the first sign 20 minutes later, broken snow crust around a fence post and a tuft of wool snagged on splintered wood. The rail had cracked where old rot met fresh storm. Beyond it, the snow was trampled in panicked arcs. Grant crouched, brushing ice from the wool. They pushed through here. Echo stood beside him, nose working, ears shifting. He did not surge forward like a hunting dog. He waited until Grant rose, then moved in a wide half-circle, staying low, using the wind instead of fighting it. That was Echo's gift. He knew fear had direction. Lost animals did not move like calm animals. They scattered, doubled back, followed one another badly, then panicked at the very thing that might save them. Echo had learned, over years beside Grant, not to chase fear from behind. He curved around it. He gave it walls without making it feel trapped. A faint bleat came from the ravine. Grant turned toward it. "There you are," he murmured. The sheep were huddled near a stand of scrub willow at the bottom of the cut, pale shapes trembling in the snow. Some had ice clinging to their faces. One ewe kept trying to climb the bank and slipping back down, each failed attempt stirring the others toward panic. There were 15 in sight, maybe more hidden behind the brush. Echo stopped at Grant's hand signal. The dog's whole body seemed to soften, his tail lowered, his head dipped. He became smaller somehow, less wolf in the eyes of the sheep, more shadow, more patience. Grant moved down the slope at an angle, planting each boot carefully. "Easy," he said, though whether he meant the sheep, Echo, or himself was not clear. The wind shoved at his shoulder. Once his foot slid, and his knee hit the snow hard. Pain flared up his leg. He ignored it, because pain was information, not instruction. Echo circled wide to the left. The sheep lifted their heads, frightened, ready to bolt. But Echo did not rush. He stepped, paused, lowered himself, stepped again. A shepherd of silence. The ewe that had been climbing the bank turned away from him, not in terror, but because he asked the air around her to change shape. One by one, the others shifted. Grant opened a path with his body. "There, come on, that's it." For the next hour, man and dog moved like two halves of one quiet command. Grant broke trail where the snow was deep. Echo kept the flock from spreading. When a lamb-sized yearling stumbled near the willow roots, Grant knelt and freed its leg from a twist of buried wire, careful, slow, speaking nonsense in a low voice. "Not your best decision, friend," he said, "but I've seen worse leadership in warmer rooms." The sheep blinked at him, unimpressed. Echo glanced back as if agreeing. Grant almost smiled. It was a small thing, that almost smile. So small the storm nearly stole it. But for a moment the hard place inside him loosened. Animals did not ask who you had failed before. They did not care what name you carried in the locked room of your chest. They only knew whether your hands were steady now. By the time the dark outline of Whitcomb Ranch appeared through the snow, Grant's beard stubble was white with ice, and Echo's coat was frosted along the spine. The sheep moved in a ragged cluster ahead of them, tired but alive. The old barn stood beyond the fenced yard, its roof hunched under snow, one lantern glowing by the side door like a stubborn star. On the porch of the ranch house stood two women. Grant saw Priscilla Moore first because she moved. She was bundled in a long, dark coat and a knitted scarf striped brick red and cream, one hand gripping the porch rail, the other raised against the wind. Her silver blonde hair escaped beneath a wool hat, and even from a distance Grant could tell she had the kind of face that had laughed often enough to carve permanent evidence around the eyes. She looked worried, but not fragile. More like a woman who had spent her whole life keeping kitchens warm, ledgers balanced, and proud people from starving on principle. Beside her stood Ines Whitcomb. She did not wave. She stood upright in a tobacco-brown canvas coat dusted with snow. Dark work pants fitted cleanly over one leg and adjusted around the outdoor prosthetic on the other. The prosthetic was not hidden. Its dark metal frame and practical winter foot showed below the hem when the wind moved her coat. There was nothing delicate about it, and nothing tragic either. It looked like what it was, a tool that had earned scratches. Ines's face was narrow and strong, with high cheekbones, a firm mouth, and pale green-gray eyes that seemed to have been cut from the same winter as the valley. Her brown hair was tied low at the back of her neck, a few strands blown across her cheek. She watched the returning sheep, then Echo, then Grant, not grateful yet, measuring. Grant understood that look. He had seen it in wounded men who hated being carried, in old climbers who would rather crawl than be pitied. In his own mirror. Echo guided the last sheep through the gate while Grant pulled it shut and dropped the latch. The flock crowded together, restless but safe. The ewe from the ravine turned once toward Echo, trembling hard enough to shake snow from her wool. Echo lowered himself to the ground. The ewe stopped. Grant noticed Ines watching. Priscilla came down 2 porch steps before Ines caught her sleeve. "Don't slip," Ines said. Priscilla gave her a look. That is rich, coming from the woman who once told a blizzard to mind its own business. Ines ignored that and turned to Grant. "All of them?" 15 from the north cut, Grant said. "Might be the full group, but I'll check the fence line once visibility improves." "It was 15, Ines said. Not relief. Confirmation. Control returning to its proper shelf. Grant nodded. Then they're home. For a moment, no one moved. The storm filled the space between them with snow. Then Ines stepped off the porch. Her movement was practiced, not smooth in the effortless way people expected from bodies they did not have to think about, but steady in a more impressive way. Each step had been negotiated with pain, ice, memory, and stubborn engineering. She crossed the packed yard toward a small sled near the feed stack. A 50-pound bag lay on it, dusted white. Priscilla sighed behind her. "Ines?" "I've got it." Grant saw the slope of ice between the sled and the barn door. He saw the way the wind had polished it. He saw Ines shift her weight before pulling the sled handle. His body moved before his better judgment caught up. 1 step. 2. He was already halfway between the gate and the feed sled when Ines turned, her eyes sharpened. "I don't need anyone's help carrying feed." The words cut clean through the storm. Grant stopped, not slowly, not with resentment. He stopped at once, boots planted in snow, hands visible at his sides. Echo, sensing the shift, looked from Ines to Grant and remained still. Priscilla closed her eyes for half a second, the expression of a woman who had witnessed this particular weather pattern many times. Grant did not apologize in the quick, cheap way that asks to be forgiven before understanding the offense. He let the silence stand. The wind tugged at the edge of his hood. Snow collected on his shoulders. Then he said, "All right?" Ines kept her hand on the sled rope. "All right?" "All right," he repeated. "You don't need help carrying feed." She stared at him as if waiting for the second half. The argument? The concern disguised as command. The sentence beginning with, "I'm just saying." Grant gave her none of it. He only took one careful step back, enough to make the space hers again. "But," he said, "that ice near the barn door is meaner than it looks. I'll stand here until you clear it." Ines's mouth tightened. It might have been anger, it might have been surprise, it might even, in another universe, have become a smile. "I didn't ask for a guard," she said. "No, ma'am." "Don't ma'am me?" "No." Priscilla made a strangled sound that might have been a cough or a laugh. "Well, this is going beautifully." Ines shot her a look, then pulled the sled. The first few feet went cleanly. The runners rasped over packed snow. Ines leaned into the rope with practiced strength, her real boot gripping, the prosthetic finding its angle. She was not pretending the work was easy. She was doing it because it was hers. Grant watched the ice near the barn door. Not her leg, not the missing part. The ice. That distinction mattered, though he did not yet know how much. Echo took a few steps to the side, then lowered himself near the gate, careful not to crowd her path. The sheep rustled inside the fence. The rescued ewe, still trembling, edged toward the bars as if drawn by the dog's calm. Ines reached the barn door without slipping. She set the feed bag upright with a hard breath and looked back at Grant. There was victory in her face, but not the kind that wanted applause. It was older than applause. A private kingdom defended. Grant inclined his head once. No smile, no praise. No, see, you did it. Just acknowledgement. Ines seemed to accept that more easily than kindness. Priscilla came down the rest of the steps, moving carefully, one hand on the rail. "Now that everyone has proven they are the most stubborn mammal in Montana, can we get those sheep settled before they unionize?" This time Grant did smile. Barely. But Ines saw it. The barn smelled of hay, cold wood, lanolin, and animal breath. Grant helped only where asked. When Priscilla pointed to the broken fence tools, he carried them. When Ines told him to hold the side gate, he held it and nothing more. Echo stayed low near the ewe, who had begun to shiver less. The other sheep watched him with cautious, round-eyed suspicion. One lamb-sized yearling stretched its nose through the gate toward Echo. Echo did not move. The young sheep touched his fur, then jerked back as if embarrassed by its own courage. Priscilla whispered, "Well, look at that. The dog's got better manners than half the men I've met." Grant said, "Low bar." Priscilla laughed, warm and sudden, and even the barn seemed less cold for it. Ines stood near the feed bin, one gloved hand resting on the edge. Her gaze was fixed on Echo and the ewe from the ravine. The ewe had stepped closer now, still shaking, but no longer wild-eyed. Echo lay flat, head resting on his paws, offering no demand, no pressure, no heroic performance, just presence. The ewe lowered her head, Slowly, almost shyly, she pressed her nose into the thick fur at Echo's neck. Echo closed his eyes. Something in Ines's face changed. Not much. A softening around the mouth, a small break in the winter of her eyes. It was the look of a person who had expected the world to keep proving that help always came with hands grabbing, voices deciding, pity pressing too close. But here was a dog who had brought her sheep home and now asked for nothing. Here was a man who had stopped when told. Outside, the storm kept raging over Briar Pass, sweeping across the white fields and half-buried fences, roaring like an old god denied entry. Inside the barn, the sheep breathed. The lantern burned. Echo stayed still beneath the ewes' trembling trust. And Ines Whitcomb, who had spent years meeting every gaze like a gate she refused to open, looked at Grant Michaels for one long moment without armor in her eyes. Not trust, not yet, but not only defense either. By morning, Briar Pass had disappeared from the rest of Montana. The pass road was buried under a hard white ridge of wind-packed snow, and somewhere above mile marker 6, a shelf of ice had broken loose from the slope and spilled across the narrow bend. It was not a disaster large enough to make the evening news. It was only the kind of winter inconvenience that could trap a person for 2 days, humble a good engine, and remind every living soul in the valley that maps were suggestions and mountains had final authority. Grant Michaels heard the update through the rescue radio while standing beside the broken section of Whitcomb fence. The wind had dropped, but the cold had sharpened. Without the storm roaring around it, the ranch felt even lonelier. Snow lay smooth over the fields, blue in the morning shadow, gold where the weak sun touched it. The sheep had settled in the main pen, still clustered closer than usual, as if they remembered the ravine and had decided that personal space was an overrated luxury. Echo stood near Grant's left knee, nose lifted, reading the air. "Road won't open today," Captain Ellis said over the radio. He was the mountain rescue lead in Briar Pass, a square-voiced man who sounded as if he had been carved out of coffee and road salt. "Maybe tomorrow afternoon if the county plow gets help. Stay local. Check the north fence, the barn access, and make sure no stock's missing after dark." Grant looked toward the ranch house. On the porch, Ines Whitcomb was watching him with the expression of a woman who had expected the mountain to betray her, but had not expected it to leave a former Navy SEAL parked beside her barn as a consolation prize. "Copy," Grant said. "I'll remain on site." "Try not to offend her," Captain Ellis added. Grant glanced at the house again. "Too late to guarantee that." There was a short crackle that might have been laughter. "Understood." Grant clipped the radio back to his jacket. Ines had come down the porch steps before he reached the yard. She moved carefully, not slowly. That was the first thing Grant had noticed about her after the storm. There was no wasted motion in the way she used her body. Every step had a reason. Every turn had already been negotiated before it happened. The outdoor prosthetic carried snow around the metal joints, but she handled the icy yard with a familiarity that made pity look foolish. "You heard?" she asked. "Pass is closed." "I assumed. The mountain likes dramatic timing." "Captain wants me to stay in the area. Fence check, access check, possible missing stock after dark." "My ranch isn't a hotel." "I have a truck." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "My barn isn't a barracks either." "I don't need the barn." "Good, because you're not hired help." "No, and you're not here to save the place." Grant held her gaze. "No." That seemed to bother her more than argument would have. She studied him, trying to find the hook beneath his agreement. Most people had hooks. They agreed first, then tugged later. Grant did not tug, he only waited, hands relaxed at his sides, Echo standing calm beside him like a witness who already knew both sides were guilty of stubbornness. Finally, Ines pointed with her chin toward the old equipment shed near the barn. "You can park by the shed. If the wind shifts, that wall will block most of it. Don't block the feed sled. Don't leave tools where I can trip on them. Don't let your dog inside the lambing pen unless I say so." Grant nodded. "Understood. And don't look so grateful. It's temporary. I wasn't planning to embroider curtains." From the porch, Priscilla Moore called, "That is a shame. I was hoping for something tasteful with little rescue trucks on it." Ines turned her head. "Priscilla." "What? A man sleeps in a truck in my yard. I'm allowed to consider decor." Grant looked down before his mouth betrayed him. Echo's tail moved once. The morning became work. Not heroic work, not the kind that looked good in a story told by firelight. It was the ordinary labor that kept a ranch from losing one small argument with winter after another. Grant checked the broken fence posts near the north wind cut, marking 2 that needed replacement, and wiring a temporary brace where the sheep had pushed through. Ines reviewed the damage with him, not as a helpless owner waiting for expertise, but as the person who knew exactly which post had leaned for years, which rail had been patched twice, and which gate latch stuck when the temperature dropped below 10. She had built solutions into the ranch the way some people built prayers into walls. A waist-high rail ran along the packed path between the house and the barn, half buried now, but still useful where Grant cleared it. The feed room had a pulley rig bolted into the ceiling beams, its rope worn but strong. A shallow wooden slide ran from the storage platform down to the sled loading area so heavy bags could be guided instead of carried. Near the barn door, a crate of gravel sat beneath a tarp for slick mornings. The ATV had snow tires and a handmade bracket for a walking pole. None of it said weakness. It said adaptation. It said, "The world changed, so I changed the tools, not the owner." Grant respected that more than he expected to. In the old life, people talked about overcoming as if the body were an enemy to defeat. Grant had seen enough to know that was too simple. Some bodies came back altered. Some minds did too. The brave ones did not pretend nothing had happened. They learned the new map. Ines had learned hers. At midday, Priscilla called them in before the cold could turn their fingers stupid. The kitchen of the Whitcomb house was warmer than Grant expected. Not pretty in a magazine way. Better than that. Real. Copper pans hung above an old stove. A long pine table stood near the window, its surface scarred by knives, mugs, elbows, and decades of weather reports delivered with bad news. Ledgers were stacked beside a ceramic rooster missing half its comb. A jar of pencils stood next to a tin labeled "Bills because, apparently, they breed." Priscilla Moore ruled that kitchen like a monarch who had overthrown several lesser governments and replaced them with soup. She had taken off her coat, revealing a mustard cardigan over a dark dress and a faded apron patterned with tiny blue flowers. Reading glasses hung from a cord around her neck. Her silver blonde hair was pinned in a loose twist that looked one sigh away from collapse, but her eyes missed nothing. "Sit," she told Grant, sliding a mug toward him. He remained near the door. "I'm all right. No one asked for your autobiography. I said sit." Ines removed her gloves slowly. "Priscilla feeds strays, men, dogs, injured barn cats. Once a deputy." He looked undernourished. He was 6'4", emotionally undernourished then. Priscilla pushed the mug again. "Coffee." Grant sat. The coffee was so strong it seemed less brewed than forged. He took one sip and felt it stand upright in his chest. Priscilla watched him over the rim of her own cup. "Well?" He swallowed. "That could pull a truck out of a ditch." Her face brightened. "Finally, a man with manners." Ines muttered, "That was not a compliment." It was the closest thing to poetry we're likely to get before noon. Echo had been told to stay by the mudroom, and he obeyed, lying with his paws neatly crossed. But his eyes were on Priscilla. Grant noticed it because he noticed Echo noticing. The dog's gaze did not have the alert sharpness he used for strangers or unstable animals. It was softer, more fixed. Concern without command. Priscilla carried a pot from the stove to the table, and halfway there her breath caught. Just a small interruption. A hitch so brief that most people would have missed it. She set the pot down. One hand touched the upper part of her chest. Then she smiled too brightly. "Old house," she said, "makes a person dramatic." Ines was reaching for bowls and did not turn. "The house didn't make that noise. You did." "I am part of the house," came with the original beams. Grant said nothing. Echo lifted his head. Priscilla saw the dog watching and pointed at him. "Don't you start. I've been judged by Baptists, bankers, and a rooster with one eye. I will not be intimidated by a shepherd with eyebrows." Echo blinked. Grant looked into his coffee. There were different ways people said, "I'm fine." Some said it like a locked door. Some said it like a joke. Some said it before anyone asked, because the question itself would be too tender to bear. Grant had said it with blood on his sleeve once, long ago, though not enough to matter. He had said it after the call about Miles Arlen. He had said it when the review cleared him of wrongdoing. He had said it to men who tried to tell him that responsibility and guilt were not the same animal. "I'm fine." 2 words. A little bridge built over a canyon. After lunch, Ines took him through the barn systems, because if he was going to remain on site, he needed to know what not to touch. That was how she phrased it. "Emergency shutoff for the generator is there," she said, pointing with a gloved hand. "Feed pulley locks here. The slide jams if you load 2 bags crooked. Don't trust the south latch unless you hear it click twice. The loft ladder looks steady, but lies for sport." Grant nodded at each detail. "This path gets salted first," she continued. "Not because I'm delicate, because if I fall there, no one enjoys the paperwork." Practical. "I prefer living. It's less inspirational than people expect." That made him look at her. She was adjusting the strap on her glove, eyes on her work rather than him. Snow-filtered light came through the barn boards in pale lines, touching the side of her face and the dark frame of her prosthetic. There was no self-pity in her voice, only a dry weariness with the world's appetite for turning other people's survival into a lesson. Grant understood that too. People liked stories where pain made you noble, where loss polished you smooth, where every scar became a lantern. In Grant's experience, scars mostly itched in bad weather and made airport conversations uncomfortable. Ines looked up. "What?" "Nothing." "You had a face." "I usually do." "Not that one." Grant almost answered honestly. Then old habit closed his mouth. Ines saw that as well. For a moment the barn grew quiet around them. Sheep shifted in their pens. Echo moved along the outside of the lambing gate, careful and slow, his nose low. The ewe from the ravine watched him, then took one step closer. Ines followed Grant's gaze. "He's unusual." "Echo? He doesn't push." "No." "Most dogs either chase or beg." "He learned neither helps much." Ines leaned one shoulder lightly against a support post. "From you?" Grant looked at Echo. "Maybe we learned it together." The answer seemed to settle somewhere between them. Not heavy, not soft, just real enough that neither of them knew what to do with it. Ines reached for a rusted hinge tool hanging near the side door. "This barn door's been sticking since last week. I'll deal with it after the fence." Grant looked at the door. It sagged slightly on the lower hinge, enough that the edge scraped the threshold. "Want me to look?" Her eyes flicked to him. He corrected himself. "Would it be useful if I looked?" That was different. Ines heard the difference. After a beat, she handed him the tool. "You can look. Looking is not surgery." Good. I'm underqualified for surgery. I assumed. He crouched by the hinge while she stood beside him, watching closely enough to make a lesser man nervous. Grant liked that she watched. It meant she cared how things were done. It meant the barn was not a backdrop to her pride, but an extension of her body, her history, her father's hands, her own stubborn mornings. The hinge screws were old and uneven. The wood had swollen, then frozen. He loosened the lower plate, adjusted the angle, shaved a thin curl from the warped edge, and reset the screw with a washer from his kit. It took 20 minutes because he did not rush and because Ines asked questions like a person who intended to remember the answer. Halfway through, Priscilla appeared in the barn doorway with a scarf wrapped around her head. "Ines, if you're supervising that man any harder, he'll need a union representative. I'm making sure he doesn't improve anything beyond recognition." Grant kept working. A common danger. Priscilla stepped inside, then paused. This time Grant heard the breath catch more clearly. Not much, just enough. Her hand went to the center of her chest again, then dropped quickly to adjust her scarf. Echo turned from the lambing gate and walked toward her, slow but direct. He stopped 2 feet away and sat. Priscilla looked down. "Oh, for heaven's sake," Ines glanced over. "What?" "Your guest's dog has decided I'm suspicious." Grant rose. "He doesn't think you're suspicious." "What does he think?" Grant chose his words carefully. "He notices things." Priscilla's smile thinned for half a second. "Then tell him to notice that I am old, underappreciated, and tragically surrounded by people who think breathing loudly is a federal issue." Ines frowned. "Priscilla." "I'm fine." There it was again, not a statement. A curtain. Ines seemed ready to argue, but Priscilla clapped her hands once and pointed at the door. "No, I came to announce that supper will be edible in 40 minutes, unless the stove joins the rebellion. Also, the dog is welcome in the mudroom, but if he sheds on my clean towels, I will knit him a hat he hates." Echo wagged his tail once. Priscilla narrowed her eyes. "Don't charm me. I'm immune." She left before anyone could ask another question. Ines watched the doorway after her. "She's always been dramatic." Grant looked back at the hinge. "Maybe." That single word turned Ines toward him. "You think something's wrong?" "I think she got winded crossing the yard." "It's cold." "Yes." "She fusses when people fuss over her." "So do you." Ines's face closed, but not completely. "Priscilla has been complaining about her age since she was 40. Grant did not press. He had learned, painfully and late, that truth shoved too hard became another kind of force. So he returned to the hinge. But Echo remained facing the house long after Priscilla had gone inside. By late afternoon, the barn door swung cleanly. Grant stepped back, wiped his glove across the edge, and opened it again. No scrape. Closed it. No jam. Opened it once more because old habits believed in verification. Ines stepped forward for inspection. She pulled the door herself, slowly. It moved smoother than it had in years. Her expression remained severe, but one eyebrow shifted upward. "You adjusted the hinge half an inch too high," she said. Grant looked at the door, then at her. "Half? Maybe less." "That's troubling." "It is." He nodded with grave seriousness. "But it's misaligned with discipline." For one suspended second, the barn waited. Then Priscilla, who had returned unnoticed to the doorway with a basket of towels, burst out laughing. It was not a polite laugh. It was a full, warm, kitchen-filling laugh that seemed too large for the cold barn and exactly what the old place needed. Echo's tail wagged against the straw. One of the sheep startled, then immediately forgot why. Ines turned her head away, but not fast enough. Grant saw the small smile before she hid it. not the softened look from the night before, not the guarded relief at returned sheep. This was different. Brief, unwilling, almost annoyed with itself. A sliver of sun through a crack in a locked door. Priscilla wiped at one eye. Misaligned with discipline. Lord help us, he speaks fluent Whitcomb. I do not have a language, Ines said. You have several. Most of them sound like weather warnings. Grant gathered his tools. Door should hold until spring. It had better, Ines said. There was no thank you, but when Grant turned toward the equipment shed, he found that someone had left a folded wool blanket and a thermos on the hood of his rescue truck. The thermos was labeled with a strip of tape in Priscilla's handwriting. Coffee. Dangerous, but legal. Beside it, in smaller, straighter writing, someone else had added, Don't block the feed sled. Grant stood there a moment, the cold pressing around him, echo at his side, the ranch breathing behind him in its old wooden sleep. He should have felt trapped by the closed pass. Instead, for the first time in a long while, he felt the strange discomfort of having been given a place to stand. Not a home. Not yet. Just a patch of snow beside a barn, a dangerous thermos of coffee, and two women who both said, I'm fine, as if the words could hold up the roof. Grant picked up the blanket. Echo leaned lightly against his leg. Inside the barn, the repaired door moved once in the wind and did not complain. The storm left Briar Pass quieter than before. Not peaceful, quiet. There was a difference, and Grant Michaels had learned it the hard way. Peace made room for breath. Quiet sometimes only waited for something to crack. By the third morning at Whitcomb Ranch, the snow had stopped falling, but the valley still looked sealed away from the rest of the world. The fields lay under a hard white crust. Fence posts poked through like old knuckles. The barn roof carried a heavy ridge of snow along its spine, and every now and then a loose sheet slid down with a soft thud that made the sheep lift their heads in nervous unison. The pass road remained closed, though Captain Ellis had said the plows were working their way up from the lower bend. Grant kept his rescue truck beside the equipment shed just where Ines had allowed it, careful not to block the feed sled. He had learned that at Whitcomb Ranch, permission was not a door thrown open. It was a gate unlatched 1 inch at a time. That morning, Ines wanted the pulley system checked, not because she asked for help. She made that clear while standing in the barn doorway with a coil of rope over one shoulder and a wrench in one gloved hand. The storm shifted the loft beam, she said. Or the beam shifted because it enjoys making me say ugly things before breakfast. Grant looked up at the old track above the feed platform. You want a second opinion? I want you to look at it because you're tall, you have rescue rope experience, and Priscilla says if I climb the loft ladder before the ice clears, she'll hide my coffee. From somewhere inside the house, Priscilla called, I heard that, and I stand by it. Ines did not turn around. She has the hearing of a barn owl and the mercy of a tax notice. Grant took his tool roll from the truck. Echo followed him into the barn, stopping at the threshold until Ines gave a small nod. Only then did the German shepherd step inside. He moved past the feed bins and lowered himself near the center aisle, close enough to watch, far enough to avoid becoming an opinion. The barn was old in the way some buildings became old with dignity. Its beams were dark from decades of weather and animal breath. Its floor had been swept but never polished because ranch floors had better things to do than shine. Sunlight slipped through narrow gaps in the wall planks, thin and pale, cutting the dusty air into golden strips. The smell of hay, cold metal, sheep wool, and old wood wrapped around Grant like a memory that did not belong to him, but somehow knew his name. Ines climbed 3 steps of the loft ladder, tested the 4th with her prosthetic foot, then climbed another 2. Grant stood nearby, not touching the ladder. He had offered once, carefully, to brace it. Ines had looked at him for a second, then said, "You can stand where a falling person would be inconvenient." So he did. That was progress, perhaps. Or diplomacy conducted in work boots. The pulley track had loosened near the west beam. Nothing dangerous yet, but enough to cause trouble if a heavy feed bag swung at the wrong angle. Grant tightened 2 bolts, checked the rope, then noticed the board behind the pulley bracket. It bowed outward slightly. Not much. A 1/4 inch at most. He ran his gloved fingers along the edge and felt a pocket of air behind it. "Ines!" She was below now, sorting a coil of rope. If that sentence ends with bad news, say it slowly. "There's a loose board behind the pulley." There are loose boards all over this barn. Most of them are older than local government. This one's hiding something. That brought her over. Grant worked the edge of the board free with the flat end of a pry tool. He moved slowly, not wanting to splinter the old wood. Ines stood beside him, close enough to see, but not crowding. Echo lifted his head. The board came away with a dry groan. Behind it, wedged between a vertical stud and a crossbrace, sat a small wooden mailbox. Not a metal one, not the kind posted at a roadside. This was handmade, shaped like a narrow house with a curved top and a little hinged door in front. Dust clung to it in gray fur. One corner was blackened, not painted, but scorched. The wood bubbled and dark, as if fire had licked it once and decided to leave a signature. Ines did not reach for it at first. Her face changed so subtly, Grant might have missed it if he had not spent half his life noticing what people tried to hide. "That was my father's," she said. Grant lowered his hand. "You want to take it?" Ines nodded, but still did not move. For a moment, the barn held its breath. Then she removed one glove, tucked it under her arm, and reached into the wall. Her fingers closed around the little mailbox gently, almost formally, as if taking the hand of someone long gone. Dust fell across her sleeve. The small door rattled. "Harold made this," she said, "before I was born." "Your father?" "Yes." Grant knew the name. Harold Whitcomb. The dead man whose ranch still spoke through everything, the feed schedule written in old pencil on the tackroom wall, the handmade brackets, the stubborn systems, the worn rails polished by use. A man Grant had never met, yet had been negotiating with since he arrived. Ines turned the mailbox in her hands. The scorched corner caught the light. "I thought this burned," she said. Priscilla appeared in the barn doorway as if summoned by the past itself. She had a towel over one shoulder and flour on one sleeve. Her cheerful face dimmed when she saw the box. "Well," she said softly, "I haven't seen that little thing in years." Ines looked at her. "You knew it was here?" "No, I knew it existed." Priscilla stepped in slowly. "Your father used to keep odd things in odd places. Said thieves never stole what they didn't understand. Of course, he also once hid his winter gloves in the flour bin, so we mustn't treat him as a prophet." Ines did not laugh. She opened the little front door. Inside were letters. Not many. 5 or 6 envelopes tied with a faded piece of twine. The paper had yellowed at the edges. None had stamps. None had been sent. On the top envelope, in dark, slanted handwriting, was written, "To Nathaniel Cross, if courage ever needs an address." Grant felt the name strike somewhere behind his ribs. He did not speak. Ines noticed anyway. "You know that name?" Grant kept his eyes on the envelope. "I knew a Nathaniel Cross." Priscilla looked between them. "Well, that sounded like a door opening in a haunted house." Ines untied the twine. "Not here," Grant said before he could stop himself. The 2 women looked at him. He corrected his tone. "The paper's brittle. Kitchen table would be better. More light. Less dust." Ines held his gaze for a second, deciding whether that had been a command. "Apparently, it passed inspection." "Fine," she said. "Kitchen table." Echo rose as they walked back through the snow-packed path, the mailbox cradled in Inez's arms. He stayed close to Grant but watched Ines. The little wooden box seemed too light to deserve such silence and too heavy for any hand to carry comfortably. Inside, Priscilla cleared the table with unusual efficiency. The ceramic rooster, the ledger stack, the jar of pencils, even the tin labeled with its joke about bills, all moved aside. She laid down a clean dish towel as if preparing a place for bread, or a child, or a wound. Ines set the mailbox on it. No one sat at first. Then Priscilla did, because Priscilla believed chairs existed to tell human pride when it had gone far enough. "Read it," she said gently. Ines opened the first letter. The handwriting was Harold Whitcomb's, but younger than the signatures Grant had seen on old maintenance tags around the ranch. The words leaned forward, impatient and uneasy. Ines read aloud. "Nathaniel, I have written this 3 times and burned the first 2 because I cannot make thanks sit right on paper. You pulled me from the west barn when smoke had taken the rafters and my own legs had quit being useful. I remember your hand on my collar. I remember being angry at you for saving me because a man is a fool when shame is the only thing he has left to hold." Priscilla placed one hand over her mouth. Ines stopped. The kitchen seemed to shrink around them. Grant could see the west barn in his mind, though he had never seen it burn. Smoke pressed low, wood snapping, a younger Harold trapped in the pride of his own body, furious not at the fire, but at the proof that he could not beat it alone. He knew that fury. He had seen men wake in hospital beds, angry at the nurse who saved them. He had heard old ranchers curse the neighbor who pulled them from a ditch. He had once hated a medic for putting a blanket around his shoulders because the gesture had told the world he was shaking. Ines continued, quieter. "You told me. Being carried out is not the same as being made small." I did not answer. "I wish I had." She stopped again. This time, no one rushed her. Grant stared at the table grain. Nathaniel Cross, older than Grant by nearly 20 years, a former military instructor with hands like weathered rope, and a voice that never rose because it never needed to. In training, Nathaniel had not been the loudest man. He did not worship toughness the way young men sometimes did before life corrected them. He had once watched Grant, then 26, and burning with the need to prove himself, muscle through a rescue drill too fast. Grant had reached the casualty first, secured the line, completed the task ahead of the others. Nathaniel had not praised him. He had only said, "Michaels, saving a man is not the same as taking over his life. Learn the difference before someone pays for it." Grant had hated that sentence at the time. Later, he had carried it like a coin in his pocket. Then Miles Arlen died, and Grant lost the coin somewhere in the dark. Ines opened the second letter. This one had been written years later, after she and Callum were born. Harold wrote of the ranch expanding, of the old barn rebuilt, of a daughter who could stare down a ram without blinking, and a son who preferred clean boots and city lights even as a boy. There was affection in the lines, but also distance, as if Harold knew how to mend fences better than sentences between father and child. Then came the part that changed Inez's face. "I never told the children about the fire, not properly, a foolish omission, or maybe vanity in overalls. I taught them never to need anyone, because needing felt too much like smoke in my mouth. If my daughter grows hard from that lesson, the fault will not be hers alone." Ines lowered the paper. Priscilla whispered, "Oh, Harold." There was sorrow in those 2 words, and irritation too. The old kind one saves for the dead because they are no longer available to argue properly. Ines looked toward the window. Beyond the glass, snow glared bright over the yard. The barn stood where it had always stood, old and stubborn, keeping its secrets until a loose board gave up. "He never said," she murmured. Priscilla shook her head. No. He used to tell me if I couldn't lift a thing, I should build a better lever. That sounds like him. But he never said he'd been carried. No. Ines's fingers tightened on the edge of the letter. He let me think needing help was something you outgrew. Grant heard the wound in that sentence. It was not loud. It did not need to be. The strongest curses in families were rarely shouted. They were modeled. A father never asked. A daughter learned not to ask. A son ran from the labor but kept the ownership. A house filled with systems designed to make needing unnecessary, yet everyone inside still needed in quieter ways. Echo came to Grant then. Not Ines, not Priscilla. Grant. The dog placed his head against Grant's knee under the table. Grant had not realized his hand was clenched until Echo's weight touched him. He looked down. Echo's eyes were dark and steady. No question. No demand. Only the warm fact of him. Memory rose, unwanted. Miles Arlen laughing in a dry heat far from Montana, saying Grant worried like an old woman with better arms. Miles tightening a strap. Miles looking back once, not afraid exactly, but waiting. The moment of hesitation that Grant had replayed until it became a private religion of punishment. Grant had been cleared by every official review. That had not helped. Reviews judged actions. Guilt judged imagination. If I had moved faster, if I had chosen differently, if I had taken charge sooner. After Miles, Grant had started treating hesitation like an enemy. He had mistaken control for love, speed for courage, intervention for loyalty. He had forgotten Nathaniel Cross standing in a training yard, saying that to save someone was not to own the next step they took. Echo pressed heavier against his leg. Grant unclenched his hand and laid it on the dog's head. Ines saw the motion. She did not ask what memory had taken him. Perhaps she understood that some rooms inside a person could not be entered by force, even with kindness. She unfolded the final letter. This one was shorter. Nathaniel, you said a rescued man owes no debt except to live honestly afterward. I have failed at the honestly part more than once. If you ever pass through Montana again, there is coffee here and a barn that owes you its second life. I may not know how to say thank you with grace, but I can say this. You were right. A hand offered at the right moment is not an insult. It is proof the world has not closed all its doors. Harold Whitcomb. Ines did not speak after reading it. Priscilla took off her glasses and cleaned them, though they were not dirty. Grant looked at the little wooden mailbox, the scorched edge, the unsent letters. There was no map to hidden money, no secret deed, no miracle confession that would fix a family or punish the guilty or turn the ranch into a legend. Only paper, only a dead man trying, too late, to admit that he had been afraid. And somehow that felt heavier than treasure. Priscilla finally said, "He should have mailed them." Ines gave a small, humorless breath. To where? Courage didn't leave a forwarding address. That is almost funny, which means grief has not destroyed your manners completely. Ines touched the scorched corner of the mailbox. Why hide this? Grant answered, before he thought better of it. Because sometimes being saved feels harder to explain than being hurt. Both women looked at him. He did not take the words back. Ines's eyes were not soft, but they were listening. Grant continued, quieter. If people see the wound, they know where to place the sympathy. If they see the rescue, they start asking what you owe. Or worse, they start acting like you became less when someone reached you first. Priscilla leaned back. That sounds like experience talking. Grant said nothing. Ines folded the last letter along its old creases. My father spent his life acting like help was a debt he could never pay. Maybe he thought silence was payment. That sounds like him. It sounds like a lot of men. The sentence sat there between them, wearing no uniform and belonging to more than one grave. Outside, a sheep bleated from the pen. The ordinary sound returned the room to itself. Priscilla stood to check the stove, then paused with one hand on the chair. Not from pain this time, Grant thought. From memory? Harold was not easy, she said, but he loved this place. Loved you too, Ines. Badly sometimes. Awkwardly. Like a man trying to carry water in a fork. Ines looked down at the letters. Love shouldn't make people harder, she said. Priscilla's voice gentled. No, but fear often wears love's coat. Grant felt that one land. He thought of Miles, of every person he had tried to protect by deciding faster, stepping closer, taking over. Fear wearing love's coat. Maybe that was the uniform he had been living in for years. Echo moved from Grant's knee to the space between the table and Ines's chair. He did not push his head under her hand. He simply lay down where everyone could see him, long body warm against the floorboards, the orange tab on his collar catching the kitchen light like a coal that refused to go out. Ines watched him. He doesn't ask much, she said. Grant looked at Echo. He asks in ways people miss. What does he ask you? Grant considered lying. The old habit stood ready, clean and efficient. Instead, he said, to stay when I want to leave. The answer surprised all three of them. Even Echo lifted one ear. Priscilla's expression softened, then immediately covered itself with briskness. Well, dogs are shameless that way, asking enormous emotional things while pretending they just need a nap. Ines almost smiled, but the letters held her back. She placed them carefully inside the mailbox again, one by one. The twine had become too fragile, so she left it loose. Her fingers lingered on the envelope addressed to Nathaniel Cross. "Do you know if he's alive?" she asked. Grant shook his head. "I don't know." "Would you want to?" That question went deeper than she intended. Grant saw an older man in a training yard, heard the sentence he had ignored until life made it sacred, felt the years between then and now, filled with movement, calls, storms, engines, roads, and a refusal to sit anywhere long enough for memory to put down roots. "I don't know," he said. This time, Ines seemed to accept the answer as honest. She closed the little mailbox door. The click was soft, final but not finished. Then she carried the box to the small shelf beneath the kitchen window, the place where Priscilla kept seed packets in spring and bills in winter. She set it there with care, not hidden this time, not displayed like a shrine either, just present. "My father was ashamed," she said after a while, "that someone had to carry him out." Grant looked at the scorched wood. The room had gone still around them. Even Priscilla did not fill it with a joke. "There are people," Grant said slowly, "who survive something and spend the rest of their lives apologizing for being the one who made it out." The words left him before he knew whether he wanted them heard. Once spoken, they changed the room. Priscilla lowered her eyes. Ines turned toward him, and for once there was no challenge in her face. Only recognition, not of the details, not of Miles Arlen or Nathaniel Cross, or any name Grant had not given. Recognition of a shape, a wound made not by what happened, but by what a person believed he should have done differently. Echo rested his chin on Grant's boot. Outside, the snowfield blazed under a thin winter sun. The barn stood beyond the window, its old boards holding their secrets less tightly than before. No one moved to pick up a tool. No one said, "I'm fine." For the first time since Grant arrived at Whitcomb Ranch, silence entered the house and did not feel like a locked door. It felt like three people standing around something fragile, careful not to breathe too hard, because perhaps this was how healing sometimes began. Not with a rescue, not with a confession large enough to shake the rafters, only with an old wooden mailbox, a dog lying still, and the terrible mercy of learning that even the strongest people had once been carried. The morning after the old mailbox came out of the barn wall, Whitcomb Ranch wore a different kind of silence. The storm had finally spent itself. No new snow fell. The sky hung low and gray over Briar Pass, not angry now, only exhausted, like an old animal resting after a long charge. The fields were white and smooth, the fences dark where Grant had cleared them, and the barn stood with its repaired door shut against the cold. But something had changed inside the house. No one spoke of Harold's letters at breakfast. The little wooden mailbox sat on the shelf beneath the kitchen window, not hidden, not honored, simply present. It watched them in its scorched silence while Priscilla poured coffee, Ines buttered toast she barely ate, and Grant kept his eyes mostly on his cup. Echo lay by the mudroom, his head on his paws, the orange tab on his collar catching the dull light whenever he breathed. Some truths did not demand discussion right away. They only moved into the room and waited. By mid-morning, Grant was outside checking the east fence line with Echo. Captain Ellis had radioed that county plows were making progress, but the pass would remain restricted until the afternoon at least. There was still work to do. A ranch after a blizzard was not a place recovering from one wound, but from 100 small cuts. A latch iced shut, a trough line frozen, a hinge twisted by wind, a drift packed against the wrong door. Grant liked those kinds of problems. They did not ask what he felt. They only asked whether his hands still worked. Echo stopped before Grant saw the man. The German shepherd had been moving along the fence with his usual quiet attention, nose low, ears shifting with the field sounds. Then he paused near the east gate and lifted his head. His body did not stiffen into attack. He did not bark. He simply became still in that complete way only a good working dog could manage, as if the air itself had asked him a question. Grant followed his gaze. A man stood beyond the fence about 40 yards down, near a shallow drift where the service track curved toward the lambing shed. He wore a brown canvas coat, a baseball cap pulled low, thick jeans and boots that had been dirtied on purpose, but not convincingly. A ranchman usually carried weather on him without trying. This fellow looked as if he had borrowed it. He raised one gloved hand when he noticed Grant. "Morning," he called. Grant did not call back right away. He walked toward him, boots crunching over the packed snow. Echo came with him, not ahead, not behind, beside. The stranger had a long face, pale from cold, with salt and pepper hair showing under the cap, and small eyes that moved too quickly. He smiled in a way that reached his mouth but never troubled the rest of him. "You folks Whitcomb Ranch?" the man asked. Grant stopped on the inside of the fence. "Depends who's asking." "Name's Martin." He patted his coat pocket as if searching for a card, then seemed to think better of it. "Martin Quaid. I'm over from the Stillwater side. Heard Whitcomb might sell breeding stock come spring." Grant looked over Martin's shoulder at the empty service track, then at the man's boots. "You walk in?" "Road's bad." "It is." "I parked down by the lower bend." "That's a long walk to ask about sheep." Martin's smile thinned. "Good sheep are worth a walk." Echo moved one step forward and stopped. Not threatening. Blocking. Martin's eyes flicked to the dog, then away, too fast. Grant saw the small bulge beneath the man's coat where a compact camera or phone rested against his ribs. He saw the way Martin's gaze slid past him toward the barn roof, the repaired hinge, the patched north fence, the icy strip near the feed path. A man buying sheep would look at the flock, their build, their wool, their movement. Martin looked at liability. Then the ranch house door opened. Ines stepped onto the porch. She wore her brown canvas coat, a dark scarf, work pants adjusted cleanly around the outdoor prosthetic. She had one hand on the porch rail, not leaning, only touching it because the steps were still slick. Behind her, Priscilla appeared with a dish towel over one shoulder, her expression bright in the dangerous way of women who had already decided not to like someone. Martin noticed Ines. More precisely, he noticed how she came down the first step. His eyes moved to her prosthetic, then to the rail, then to the strip of packed snow below the porch. Grant felt heat rise in him despite the cold. Ines saw the look too. She finished the steps without hurry, crossed the yard, and stopped beside Grant on the inside of the fence. "If you're here about sheep," she said, "you should be looking at sheep." Martin tipped his cap. "Ma'am?" Her eyes narrowed. That word rarely improves a conversation. Grant looked away for half a second, so his face would not give him away. Priscilla called from the porch. "She prefers your highness of wool and weather, but we're trying to keep her humble." Ines did not turn. "Priscilla." "What? Hospitality is a dying art." Martin tried to laugh. It did not fit him well. "I didn't mean any offense," he said. "Just heard you had some storm damage. Thought I'd ask around while I'm in the area." "Ask who?" Ines said. He blinked. "Pardon?" "You said you heard. From who?" For the first time, Martin's face lost its borrowed rancher ease. Echo noticed. The dog's tail lowered. He placed his body directly between Martin and the porch, not close to the fence, not growling, only present in a way that made the space smaller. Behind the barn, the sheep began to shift. A few bleated. The ewe echo had calmed after the storm moved away from the fence line and toward the others, as if some old animal wisdom had decided the stranger carried bad weather in his pockets. Grant did not speak. Every instinct in him wanted to step in now. The old machinery inside him had already built 3 plans. Question the man. Search for the camera. Send him off the property. But the memory of Nathaniel Cross's words, dragged up by Harold's letters, stood in the doorway of his mind. Saving a man is not the same as taking over his life. Maybe the same was true of a woman. Ines's life was not a doorway for him to charge through. It was a gate she opened or did not. Martin cleared his throat. "Look, I didn't come to cause trouble." "That's good," Ines said, "because trouble here usually has to work." The man glanced toward the road, and that was when the black SUV appeared. It came slowly over the lower rise, too clean for the road, its dark paint shining beneath a skin of melted snow. It stopped near the main gate with a softness that seemed almost theatrical. The driver's door opened, and Callum Whitcomb stepped out into the cold, as if the ranch were an unfortunate room he had been forced to enter. Grant knew who he was before anyone said his name. Family resemblance did strange things. Callum had Ines's eyes, green-gray and sharp, but where hers had weather in them, his had glass. He was younger, early 40s, tidy in a camel-wool coat, black gloves, dark trousers, and city boots that had not yet learned the shape of mud. His brown hair was combed neatly to the side. No stubble, no windburn. He carried a polished leather folder in one hand and the faint expression of a man arriving to solve a problem he had helped define. Ines went very still. Priscilla stopped smiling. Callum closed the SUV door and looked first at Martin, then at Grant, then at Echo, and finally at his sister. "Ines," he said, "I was hoping to speak with you before this became unpleasant." Priscilla muttered from the porch, "A promising start if your goal is unpleasant." Callum's eyes flicked toward her. "Priscilla?" "Callum, I'd say you look well, but the truth has enough burdens today." Ines lifted one hand slightly, not to silence Priscilla completely, only to hold the line of the moment. "What is he doing here?" she asked, nodding toward Martin. Callum adjusted his glove. "Mr. Quaid is assisting me with documentation." "Documentation of what?" "The property condition." "My property?" "Our property, legally." There it was, not shouted, not thrown like a stone, placed carefully on the snow between them. Grant saw Ines absorb it. Her posture did not change, but something in her face tightened around an old hurt, the kind that had worn a family name long before it wore legal language. Callum looked toward the barn. "I've tried to discuss this reasonably for months." "You emailed 3 times asking me to sell," Ines said. "I raised concerns." "You raised a price?" His mouth flattened. "The ranch is becoming difficult to maintain safely." The word safely drifted through the air like smoke. Echo's head turned toward Ines. Callum continued, voice smooth, patient, almost kind. "The storm damage proves what I've been saying. The barn is old, the heating system is outdated, the fences are failing. You're short on labor. Insurance premiums are already a concern. If this continues, it affects both our interests under the trust." Priscilla came down 1 step. "Funny how your interest in the trust blooms whenever land values do." Callum ignored that with the practiced dignity of a man stepping over manure without looking down. "I spoke with Marla Keene last week," he said. "She handles agricultural risk assessment for the policy group. Based on preliminary information, she agrees the property may require a full safety review." Ines's jaw moved once. Grant did not know Marla Keene personally, but he knew the type of pressure Callum had just introduced. Insurance, risk, review. The words sounded clean, almost boring. That was their power. A cruel thing dressed in paperwork could enter places anger could not. Callum opened his leather folder. "I also had a consultation with Evelyn Hart regarding the family trust. Nothing formal yet. But if the property is being operated in a way that significantly damages shared value or creates ongoing hazard, there are legal remedies." Priscilla made a small sound behind them, sharp enough to cut the cold. Ines said, "You went to Evelyn before you came to me?" "I've come to you." "You came with a man taking pictures through my fence." Martin shifted. "I wasn't." Echo took 1 silent step forward. Martin stopped speaking. Callum looked at the dog with mild distaste, then back at Ines. "Mr. Quade's role is to gather objective evidence." "Objective," Ines repeated. Grant could hear the pain beneath the word. It was not the pain of being accused by a stranger. Strangers could be dismissed or cursed or left outside the gate. This was different. This was a brother taking old memories and folding them into a file. The barn where they had hidden as children became structural risk. The porch steps where Harold had taught them to scrape boots became fall hazard. The feed path Ines had redesigned after her accident became evidence of limited mobility. The ranch was still home, but Callum had turned it sideways so others might see only danger. Ines looked at Martin. "Did you photograph me?" Martin's mouth opened, then closed. Callum answered for him. "Only exterior observations, nothing improper." "That wasn't my question." Martin's eyes went to Callum. Ines saw it. Grant did too. The old engine inside him roared. He imagined himself stepping forward, voice low, telling Martin to hand over the camera, telling Callum where he could file his concerns, placing his body between Ines and the insult wearing a camel coat. It would have been easy, almost satisfying. His hand tightened once at his side. Echo remained still. The dog did not look at Callum. He looked at Grant, waiting. That was the strange mercy of a good dog. Echo knew when Grant's anger moved before his judgment. He had stood beside him through mountain rescues and long nights, through engines frozen solid and hikers too cold to be grateful, through memories Grant pretended were only dreams. Echo knew the difference between readiness and control. Grant breathed in. Cold air, hay, leather, snow. He made himself do nothing. Ines was not alone, but this was hers to answer. She stepped closer to the fence. The metal joint of her prosthetic caught the gray light, scratched and practical and unashamed. She did not hide it. She did not perform strength for Callum either. She simply stood on the ground she had kept alive through storms he had only heard about in forecasts. "You don't get to use my body as evidence against my work," she said. Callum's face tightened. "No one is talking about your body. You are talking around it. Ines, you're saying barn, fence, labor, insurance, safety. But what you mean is, I don't look the way you think a ranch owner should look." For a moment, Callum's mask cracked. Not enough for apology, only enough to show irritation. "That is unfair," he said. "No," Ines replied. "Unfair is growing up on this land, leaving it, waiting for me to keep it running, then coming back with a stranger and a camera to prove I cannot." The sheep had gone quiet behind the barn. Even Priscilla did not speak. Grant saw something then that he had not expected. Ines was angry, yes, but beneath the anger was grief. Not fresh grief, old grief, the kind that waited years for a name. Callum had not only threatened the ranch, he had confirmed a fear she had likely carried since the accident, that some part of her own family had looked at her and quietly revised the size of her life. Callum closed the folder with a soft slap. "I'm trying to prevent embarrassment," he said. Priscilla's voice came low from the porch. "Too late?" He continued as if she had not spoken. "There is still time to handle this privately. Sell voluntarily. The offer from the development group is strong, more than generous. You could buy a place in town, somewhere accessible, somewhere less isolated. You wouldn't have to fight winter every year just to prove a point." There it was. At last, beneath the careful language, the shape of his belief stood plain. Accessible. Less isolated. Not because she had chosen it, because he had. Ines's hand closed around the top rail of the fence. Grant saw the pressure in her knuckles. He knew the urge to reach for her arm, not because she seemed weak, but because something in him still believed pain should be intercepted before it landed. He did not move. Echo did. The German shepherd walked quietly to Ines's side and sat, not touching her, not leaning, simply aligning himself with her body as if choosing a place in the world. His head stayed level. His dark eyes remained on Callum. For the first time, Callum looked uneasy. Not afraid of teeth, afraid of witness. Ines drew one breath, then another. When she spoke, her voice was calm enough to be dangerous. "Tomorrow," she said. Callum blinked. "What?" "Tomorrow, at my kitchen table." "This isn't a social call." "No, it's a paper fight, apparently. So bring your papers." "Ines, I don't think—" "You rarely do when this place is involved." His face flushed. Ines continued, "Bring the reports, the photographs, the insurance notes, whatever you believe proves I'm failing. If Marla Keene has concerns, put them on the table. If Evelyn Hart gave you legal language, bring that too." Callum glanced toward Grant. "And him?" Grant felt the question land. Ines did not look back. "Grant is here under Mountain Rescue Authority until the pass opens," she said. "He witnessed the storm damage and the livestock recovery. If I ask him a question, he can answer. If I don't, he won't." Grant kept his face still. There was more trust in that sentence than praise could have offered. Callum's jaw worked. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." Ines stepped back from the fence. Snow shifted around her boot and the winter foot of her prosthetic. She stood upright, one hand resting now on the porch rail because she had returned to it, not because Callum had driven her there. The gray sky behind her made her look carved from stormwood and iron. Then Callum said the thing he should not have said. "You should sign before this becomes embarrassing for everyone." For 1 second, the ranch itself seemed to inhale. Priscilla's eyes flashed. Grant felt his own body go cold, not from weather, but from restraint. Martin Quaid looked down at his boots, which was the first honest thing he had done all morning. Ines did not flinch. She placed her hand flat on the rail. "Tomorrow," she said, "at the kitchen table in this house, you bring your paperwork." She looked at the barn, the fields, the sheep, the snow-packed paths she had altered to fit a life nobody else had the right to measure from a photograph. Then she looked back at her brother. "I'll bring the truth." Callum held her gaze for a moment, but there was nothing left in the cold air for him to win. Not today. He turned toward his SUV with the stiff dignity of a man retreating while pretending to lead. Martin Quaid followed, slower. At the gate he looked once toward Echo. The dog did not move. The SUV backed down the track and vanished beyond the white rise, leaving 2 thin tire lines in the snow like marks from a blade. Only when the vehicle disappeared did Priscilla speak. "Well," she said, "that was every bit as charming as stepping barefoot into a bucket of mice." No one laughed, not even Grant. Ines stood with her hand still on the rail, her face turned toward the empty road. The fight had not begun. Not truly. But something older had been named, and naming a thing did not always make it smaller. Sometimes it only showed how long its shadow had been. Grant wanted to say something. He wanted to tell her she had handled it well, that Callum had no right, that she was not alone. All true, all dangerous if placed wrong. So he waited. After a long moment, Ines looked down at Echo. The dog remained beside her, patient as a vow. "You didn't bark," she said. Echo blinked. Grant answered quietly, "He didn't need to." Ines looked at Grant then. The old armor was back in her eyes, but not all of it. Somewhere behind it, hurt moved like an animal under snow. "Tomorrow," she said. Grant nodded. "Tomorrow? And you won't speak unless I ask?" "No." "You won't decide what I should say?" "No." "You won't stand in front of me?" Grant held her gaze. This time the answer cost him more. "No?" Ines studied him for a moment, as if weighing not the word, but the man trying to live up to it. Then she turned toward the house. Priscilla opened the door for her, and the 2 women went inside together. Grant remained in the yard with Echo at his side. The barn behind him creaked softly in the thawing cold. The sheep began to move again, ordinary life resuming, because animals did not believe in legal threats until they came with empty feeders. Echo leaned lightly against Grant's leg. Grant looked down at the dog. "You were right," he said. Echo's ears shifted. "I know," Grant muttered. "Don't get proud." The dog wagged his tail once, as if pride, like courage, could afford to be quiet. Across the yard, beneath the kitchen window, Grant could just see the shape of the old wooden mailbox on the shelf. The scorched corner faced outward now, a small dark mark from a fire long gone. Yesterday, it had asked what a person owed after being saved. Today, the ranch had asked a different question. What did love owe a person who could stand for herself? Grant did not yet know the full answer, but he knew what it was not. It was not taking the first step for her. It was not making her smaller in the name of keeping her safe. It was standing close enough to hear when she called, and far enough away that everyone could see she had not needed a man to lend her a spine. The gray morning stretched over Briar Pass. Tomorrow waited at the kitchen table. That night, the Whitcomb kitchen became a battlefield without a single weapon. No one raised a voice at first. No one needed to. The long pine table carried enough evidence to make noise for them. Repair invoices lay in one stack, weighted down by a chipped blue mug. Vaccination records for the sheep sat beside them, sorted by year and marked in Priscilla Moore's firm pencil hand. Maintenance logs for the generator, water heater, barn wiring, and feed pulley system were spread across the middle of the table. There were photographs, too. The north fence before the storm, the north fence after Ines repaired it last fall, the barn ramp before gravel was added, the same ramp after it was fitted with a side rail. Near the window, beneath the shelf where Harold Whitcomb's old wooden mailbox rested, A thinner folder waited. It contained a letter from Ines's orthopedic specialist confirming that she could safely perform ranch work with proper adaptations, equipment, and pacing. Ines had placed that folder face down. Grant noticed. He noticed everything that night because his mind had slipped into its old shape. The room had become a map. The papers became positions. Callum was the incoming threat. Martin Quaid was an unknown variable. Marla Keene and Evelyn Hart were outside forces. The kitchen table was not a table anymore. It was terrain, and Grant Michaels knew terrain. He stood beside the table in his olive combat shirt, sleeves pushed to the forearms, the faded edge of his seal tattoo visible whenever he reached for a document. His rescue jacket hung over a chair near the mudroom. Snow melted in a small dark patch beneath his boots. Echo lay close by, head on his paws, following the movement of paper with patient eyes. Priscilla sat at the far end of the table in her mustard cardigan, reading glasses low on her nose, a pencil tucked behind one ear like a dagger in disguise. She was pale around the mouth, but her voice remained sharp. "No, no, no," she said, tapping one receipt. "This goes with the South Trough repairs. If Callum tries to say the water line froze from neglect, I want him to trip over every receipt on his way to that lie." Ines sat near the stove, one hand around a mug she had not drunk from. Her brown hair was tied low, and her face held the stillness Grant had learned to read as effort, not calm. She was not afraid of paperwork. She was not afraid of Callum, but there was a particular cruelty in preparing to defend your home against someone who had once belonged inside it. Grant picked up a notebook and began writing. "Start with the storm timeline," he said. "Then livestock recovery, then fence condition, then equipment adaptations. If he leads with safety, don't argue emotion, answer structure, dates, receipts, witnesses." Ines looked at him. He kept writing. "If he mentions labor shortage, say seasonal help comes in during shearing and lambing. If he brings up the barn access, show the gravel purchase, then the rail installation. If he implies your mobility impacts operations—" "Stop!" The word landed flat. Grant's pen froze. Priscilla looked up over her glasses. Echo lifted his head. Ines did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Her eyes had cooled into something clearer than anger. "Did I ask you to write my answers?" Grant looked at the notebook, then at her. "I was trying to help you prepare." "I know." That should have softened it. It did not. Ines stood slowly, one hand on the back of the chair, not for weakness, but for balance. The kitchen light touched the metal of her prosthetic where her work pants had shifted above the boot. She did not look wounded. She looked tired of a war that kept changing uniforms. "You're doing the same thing they do," she said. "Only kinder." Grant felt the sentence hit before he understood it. Priscilla went very still. Ines continued, each word measured. "Callum decides I need to sell before I decide whether I'm done fighting. Strangers decide a ramp means weakness before they ask who built it. Neighbors decide carrying a bag is too much before they know whether I plan to use the sled. And now you're deciding what I should say before I've opened my mouth." Grant set the pen down. "I didn't mean—" "I know what you meant." Her face flickered then, not with rage, but with something older, more exhausted. "That is the hard part. Most of the people who made me feel small didn't mean to. They held doors I had already opened. They pulled chairs I was not ready to sit in. They took weight from my hands so fast it felt like my hands had stopped belonging to me." Priscilla lowered her gaze to the table. Ines looked at the folder from her orthopedic specialist, still face down near the window. "After the accident," she said, "people kept telling me I was inspiring. I hated that word for a long time. Inspiring meant they could smile at me and still not trust me with my own life. Inspiring meant they liked watching me stand, as long as I stood where they thought it was safe." Grant said nothing. He had taken rounds of weather in the face without stepping back. but this made him feel exposed in a way no storm could. He had thought restraint meant not taking the feed bag, not speaking at the fence, not standing in front of her when Callum arrived. But here, with a pen in his hand, he had done it anyway. He had stepped ahead of her with paper instead of boots. The old wooden mailbox sat on the shelf, its scorched corner pointed toward them like a small burned eye. Grant thought of Harold Whitcomb hiding letters he could not send. He thought of Nathaniel Cross saying that rescue did not grant ownership over another person's path. He thought of all the times he had mistaken preparation for protection and protection for permission. "I'm sorry," he said. Ines watched him, guarded. Grant took the page he had been writing on, tore it from the notebook, and folded it once. He did not throw it away dramatically. He simply placed it beside his coffee, away from the evidence stacks. "You tell me what you need," he said. "I'll do that, nothing extra." For a moment, no one spoke. Then Priscilla, with suspicious brightness, muttered, "Miracles do happen. Someone alert the Baptists and that judgmental rooster from Chapter 2. Ines gave her a look, but the edge in the room eased by half an inch. Grant sat down, not at the head of the table, beside it. That choice mattered. Priscilla began sorting again, slower now. Outside, the wind scratched lightly against the windows, no longer the roaring beast from the first night, but a thin-fingered thing testing the cracks. Echo rested his head again, but his eyes remained on Grant. Ines took up the maintenance logs. "What I need," she said, "is dates, not speeches. Dates." Grant nodded. "Dates? And if he says the barn is unsafe, I need the receipt from the West Beam reinforcement." Priscilla slid a folder toward him. "Green tab. I labeled it because civilization matters." Grant opened the folder and found exactly what she described. "And," Ines said more quietly, "if he brings up my leg, I will answer that myself." Grant looked at her. "Yes." She held his gaze long enough to test the word for cracks. Then she nodded once. The work resumed. This time it moved differently. Ines led. Priscilla guarded the numbers like a dragon with a cardigan. Grant became hands, not command. He found folders when asked. He checked dates. He held photographs up to the light so Ines could match them with invoices. When she paused to think, he did not fill the silence. That was harder than he expected. Silence had always made him reach for action. Because in the silence before Miles Arlen's last mission went wrong, Grant had hesitated. The memory came not like thunder, but like a door opening down a long hall. Miles had been 34, compact and quick, with a grin too large for the world's darker rooms. He had a way of making men laugh when they were too tense to breathe right. Before that last operation, he had slapped a gray mountain patch into Grant's palm and said, "When we're done with all this heat, Michaels, we're finding snow, rescue work, hot coffee, maybe a dog that judges you less than I do." Grant had kept the patch. He had not kept Miles. The official account had been clean. A shifting situation, limited visibility, conflicting information, no single failure. Grant's mind had rejected that mercy. He had built his own verdict instead. Too slow, too cautious, too late. Since then, whenever danger appeared, his body moved before thought. It was easier to become the wall than to stand beside someone and trust them with their own risk. Ines's voice pulled him back. "Grant." He looked up. She had seen something in his face. Not everything. Enough. "You went somewhere," she said. He looked down at the receipt in his hands. Priscilla quietly stood, gathered 2 mugs, and took them to the stove, giving the conversation space while pretending to be busy. Echo rose and came to sit by Grant's chair. The dog did not press his head into Grant's lap this time. He only placed one paw against Grant's boot. "Stay." Grant drew a slow breath. "Miles Arlen," he said. Ines did not move. "My teammate. He died years ago. I don't talk about it well." "You don't have to talk about it well," she said. That helped more than sympathy would have. Grant kept his eyes on the table. "I spent a long time thinking if I had moved faster, if I had made the call sooner, if I'd taken control instead of waiting for the picture to clear." He stopped. The sentence had no end that did not lead into darkness. "After that, I started treating every hesitation like a sin." Priscilla stood at the stove, her back turned, but her shoulders had gone still. Grant touched the edge of the folded page with the answers he had written for Ines. "I tell myself I'm helping. Most of the time I am. But sometimes I'm just trying to outrun one old moment by deciding everyone else's next one." Ines's face changed. Not softened exactly. Deepened. She looked less like a woman judging him, and more like a person recognizing the shape of a burden, even if she had never carried that exact one. When she spoke, her voice was plain. "Maybe you can't save the man who died by controlling the people who lived." The kitchen did not move. Outside, the wind dragged snow across the glass in a whisper. Grant felt the words enter him slowly, like cold water finding a crack in stone. There was no comfort in them, no easy absolution. Ines had not told him he was forgiven, or innocent, or wrong to hurt. She had simply placed truth on the table beside the invoices. And truth, like winter, did not need to shout. Echo leaned his shoulder against Grant's leg. Grant closed his eyes once. Something inside him did not heal. That would have been too easy, too false. But something did loosen. A knot that had mistaken itself for duty shifted just enough for him to breathe around it. Priscilla returned with coffee. She set one mug near Grant, then one near Ines. "Well," she said, voice gently brisk, "now that everyone has put their internal organs on the table, might I suggest we return to property records before I become sentimental and ruin my reputation?" Ines took the mug. Grant did too. The coffee was as dangerous as ever. It steadied him anyway. They worked until late. Priscilla's handwriting grew smaller as she tired. Twice Grant noticed her pause with one hand near her chest, then pretend she was only smoothing her cardigan. Echo noticed too. Each time he lifted his head. Each time Priscilla gave him a warning look. "Don't start," she told the dog after the second time. "I am not one of your sheep." Echo blinked. "No one said you were," Grant said. "I heard your tone." "I didn't use a tone." "You have a face that tones." Ines glanced up from a folder. "He does." Grant accepted this conviction without appeal. By midnight, the evidence lay in order, not as a speech, as a spine. Storm timeline, livestock recovery, fence maintenance, barn reinforcement, equipment adaptations, insurance correspondence, medical work clearance, if Ines chose to use it. The last folder remained face down. Grant did not touch it. Ines saw that too. "Thank you," she said at last. The words were small. Priscilla pretended to choke on coffee. Ines pointed at her. "Don't make it strange." "I would never." "You live to make things strange." "It is my civic duty." Grant gathered the empty mugs and carried them to the sink, because Priscilla pointed at them, and he had learned the kitchen chain of command. When he returned, Ines had placed the orthopedic letter in the final stack. Face up now. Her choice. The next morning came pale and hard. The ranch woke beneath a sky the color of tin. The storm had left drifts sculpted against the barn, but the yard paths were firm after Grant spread gravel where Ines told him to. He had slept only a few hours in the rescue truck, wrapped in the wool blanket left on the hood, Echo curled against the seat, with the intensity of a dog who believed trucks were acceptable dens if the person inside belonged to him. Before Callum arrived, Ines went to the feed sled. Grant saw her from near the barn door. She had chosen smaller feed bags that morning, each manageable, each stacked properly on the sled. Her jaw was set, not because the bags were impossible, because the day ahead would be worse than wait. Echo walked beside her. not ahead, not behind. He matched the pace of her prosthetic with astonishing care, slowing when the winter foot found a slick patch, pausing when she shifted balance, moving again when she did. He did not look at her leg. He looked at the path. Grant stood back, hands empty. The urge came anyway. It always did. Step in. Make it easier. Remove the risk. Prove you are useful. He let the urge pass through him like wind through fence wire. Ines reached the barn door and stopped. "Grant." He straightened. "Yes." "Hold the door." 2 words. No more. He opened the door and held it. She pulled the sled across the threshold herself. Echo slipped through after her and sat near the feed bin as if this, too, had been part of a sacred ceremony. Ines set the first bag down, breathing hard but steady. She looked back at Grant. He did not praise her. He did not ask if she was all right. He only stood there with the door in his hand, doing exactly what she had asked. That was when Priscilla appeared on the porch, wrapped in a blue-gray coat and brick-red scarf, trying to look as if she had not been watching the whole thing. "Breakfast is ready," she called. "If anyone plans to argue with a real estate vulture on an empty stomach, I will not be held responsible for the quality of their decisions." Ines rolled her eyes. But as they crossed back toward the house, Priscilla sat down too quickly on the porch bench. Her hand went to her chest. This time, Ines saw it. "Priscilla?" "I'm fine," Priscilla said immediately. Grant stopped at the bottom step. Echo moved to the bench and stood in front of her, head tilted, quiet and intent. Priscilla frowned at the dog. "You are becoming very rude." Grant kept his voice low. "Dr. Naomi Bell still at the clinic on First Street?" Priscilla's eyes sharpened. "Who told you about Naomi?" "Ines mentioned her once." "I did not," Ines said. Priscilla sighed. "Then I mentioned her while complaining, which should not count as evidence." Grant looked at her, not pushing, not commanding. Chest tightness in cold weather isn't something to joke away forever. "My heart is merely protesting bad coffee." "Your coffee?" "Certainly not. The memory of other coffee." Ines's concern was no longer hidden. "Priscilla?" The older woman looked from Ines to Grant, then down at Echo, who had planted himself like a furry judge. Grant said, "Strong people aren't the ones who hide pain best." Priscilla's mouth opened with a joke ready. For once, it failed to arrive. Her eyes lowered, then she waved a hand, smaller than usual. "After today, we will talk about Naomi after today." Grant wanted to argue. He did not. Ines looked like she wanted to argue too. She did not either, though it clearly caused her pain. Priscilla stood carefully and pointed toward the kitchen door. "Now, everyone inside before I become the subject of a committee." The kitchen had changed by the time Callum arrived. Not in furniture, in gravity. Ines sat at the head of the pine table, the evidence stacks arranged before her like quiet hills. Priscilla sat to her right with the ledger and pencil, still pale, but upright. Grant sat to Ines's left, not at the head, not behind her, not near the door like a guard waiting to spring. Beside. Echo lay under the table, his body close to Ines's boots, his head resting near Grant's foot, a bridge of fur and breath between them. The old mailbox remained on the shelf beneath the window, its scorched corner visible above the papers. When the knock came, it was polite. That made it worse. Priscilla murmured, "Vultures have learned manners. Civilization trembles." Ines did not smile. "Come in," she said. The door opened. Callum Whitcomb stepped inside with Martin Quaid behind him and a cold stack of folders under one arm. Callum's coat was immaculate, his gloves black, his expression composed in the way of a man who believed composure could be mistaken for righteousness. Martin looked less comfortable than he had at the fence. His camera case hung at his side, and his eyes avoided Echo immediately. Snow drifted in around their boots before Callum shut the door. His gaze traveled over the table, the documents, Priscilla, Grant, and finally Ines. "Ines," he said, "I hope we can be reasonable." Grant felt the old instinct rise. Answer him. Cut him off. Control the room. Echo's tail touched his boot once. Grant looked at Ines. She did not look back. She did not need to. She opened the first folder herself. "We'll begin with the storm timeline," she said. Grant folded his hands in his lap. Silent. Still. For the first time in years, he understood that not speaking could require more courage than command. Callum Whitcomb had expected the kitchen table to look smaller. That was the first thing Grant Michaels understood when Callum stepped fully into the room and saw what Ines had prepared. The folders were not scattered in panic. They were arranged with calm precision across the long pine table. Storm timeline, fence maintenance, barn reinforcement, feed system inspection, livestock records, insurance correspondence, and the medical work clearance Ines had chosen with visible effort to place face up. The old wooden mailbox sat on the shelf beneath the window, its scorched corner turned toward the room like a small witness from another life. Ines sat at the head of the table. Priscilla sat to her right with the ledger open, pencil ready, reading glasses low on her nose. Her face looked a shade too pale, but her eyes were sharp enough to slice paper. Grant sat to Ines's left, hands folded, back straight, silent. Echo lay beneath the table near Ines's boots, his golden black body still, except for the slow rise and fall of his breathing. Callum took all of this in. A woman ready, a witness quiet, a dog watching, a kitchen that refused to become a courtroom for his convenience. Martin Quaid came in behind him, carrying a camera case and a thin black notebook. His canvas coat was damp at the shoulders. He did not look at Echo for more than half a second. "I appreciate everyone making time," Callum said, removing his gloves finger by finger. Priscilla looked at the wall clock. "We didn't. Time was already here. You walked into it." Callum's smile tightened. "Priscilla?" "Callum." Ines opened the first folder. "Storm timeline." He looked at her. "I thought we might begin with the broader issue." "We are," she said. "You claimed the storm damage proves ongoing mismanagement, so we begin with the storm." Grant kept his eyes on the table. The old instinct rose in him like a dog straining at a leash. He knew how Callum would move. Start broad, make emotion seem unreasonable, use concern as a saddle, and try to ride the room. Grant could stop the rhythm before it formed. He could cut in, redirect, force structure. Echo's tail brushed his boot once beneath the table. Grant did not speak. Ines laid out the first page. North fence broke at the wind cut between 11 at night and dawn. The same section was reinforced last October. Here is the receipt for posts, wire, and hardware. Here are dated photographs after repair. Here is Captain Ellis's radio note, confirming storm conditions exceeded normal livestock operation risk. Callum glanced at the documents without bending far enough to truly read them. "The question isn't whether storms happen," he said. "The question is whether the property is maintained to a safe standard given current circumstances." "Current circumstances," Ines repeated. Martin Quaid wrote something. Priscilla's pencil snapped down on the table. "If that phrase is meant to include Ines's leg, write it plainly. I charge extra for cowardly grammar." Martin stopped writing. Callum exhaled. "No one is making this personal." Ines turned the next page. "Then keep up." Grant felt, despite everything, the faintest pull at the corner of his mouth. For the next hour, Callum opened doors, and Ines closed them with paper. He brought photographs of the ice near the barn door. Ines produced gravel receipts and the maintenance schedule, then pointed out that the photograph had been taken before the path was cleared after a night of wind drift. He brought an image of the roofline bent under snow. Ines produced the previous spring's barn inspection and the invoice for west beam reinforcement. He pointed to the broken lambing shed rail. Ines showed the repair order already scheduled, the storm report, and the livestock count showing no animal loss from the damage. He mentioned the feed pulley system as aging equipment. Ines showed the inspection tag and the parts replaced the prior season. Priscilla filled in numbers with terrifying gentleness. "Wool contract remains active through September," she said, sliding one page forward. Callum glanced at it. "That doesn't address long-term risk." "No, darling, it addresses your claim that the ranch is already financially failing. I'm old-fashioned. I like accusations to be wrong in order." Martin wrote that down, then seemed to realize he had written something unhelpful and stopped. Grant remained silent until Ines looked at him. "Grant," she said, "what time did you reach the broken fence?" He answered only that. "Approximately 13:20. How many sheep recovered?" 15. Condition? Cold, stressed, mobile, no visible severe injury. One yearling tangled in buried wire, freed on sight. Was the fence break consistent with neglect? Callum looked ready to object. Grant did not look at him. No. It was consistent with old timber failing under storm load after drift pressure and animal panic. The section had evidence of prior repair. Ines nodded. "Thank you." Grant stopped. That was all. The silence after his answer bothered Callum more than speech would have. Grant could see it. Callum had prepared for interference. A former SEAL, a rescue volunteer, a man with a dog and a calm voice, easy to paint as Ines's new shield, maybe even as an outsider influencing her. But Grant did not rise into the role Callum had built for him. He remained beside, not before. By noon, Marla Keene joined by phone. Her voice came through Priscilla's old speaker device in the center of the table, crisp and professional. Grant had never seen her, but her tone made him imagine a woman with sharp glasses, a rubber-cased tablet, and very little patience for people who wasted time. She did not sound cruel. She sounded like someone who trusted forms because forms did not usually cry or lie, only waited to be completed incorrectly. "I want to be clear," Marla said. "My comments last week were based on preliminary information provided by Mr. Whitcomb. I have not conducted a full site review." Callum's jaw tightened. Ines leaned forward. "Were you told the north fence section had been reinforced last fall?" A pause. "No, I was told the fence line showed repeated failure." Priscilla made a soft clicking sound with her tongue. Ines continued. "Were you told the barn access path has a gravel protocol after snowfall?" "No." "Were you told the pulley system was inspected last season?" "I was told it was original to the barn." "It is not," Ines said. "Parts are original. The load-bearing hardware is not." Grant watched Martin Quaid shift in his chair. Something was changing in the room. Not victory, not yet. But the story Callum had built had begun losing pieces. It had relied on distance, on photographs without explanations, on words like concern and safety stretched thin over a hunger for sale. Marla's voice cooled slightly. "Mr. Whitcomb, the omission of maintenance context affects risk interpretation." Callum leaned toward the device. "I provided what was relevant based on my access." Priscilla looked at him. "Your access included a telephone, a mailbox, and one sister with a working mouth." Ines did not smile, but the room almost did. Then Evelyn Hart joined the call for a brief legal clarification. Her voice was older than Marla's, lower, with the calm weight of someone who had seen families try to make paperwork carry what conversation had failed to hold. She did not speak often. When she did, Callum sat straighter. The Whitcomb Trust does not allow one beneficiary to compel sale by preference alone, Evelyn said. A partition action or related remedy would require substantial evidence of damage to shared value, operational risk, or breach of duty. Photographs may support review. They do not on their own establish failure. Callum closed his eyes for half a second. Ines folded her hands on the table. Grant saw her shoulders drop a fraction. Not relief. Endurance. Evelyn continued, I would also advise all parties to avoid characterizing physical disability as operational incapacity. The law is not sympathetic to that argument when adaptive systems and performance records exist. Priscilla whispered, Bless that woman's expensive education. Martin Quaid coughed into his hand. Callum's face had gone smooth, which meant his anger had gone underground. When the calls ended, the kitchen felt larger. The documents remained, but they no longer looked like sandbags against a flood. They looked like what they had always been, evidence that Ines had not been merely surviving on that ranch. She had been running it. Callum stood. This isn't finished, he said. No, Ines replied, but it is clearer. He gathered his folders too neatly. You're making this adversarial. You brought a private investigator to my fence. Martin looked down again. Callum put on his gloves. I tried to handle this privately. You tried to handle me privately. The words landed clean. Callum did not answer them, perhaps because there was no answer that did not show too much. At the door, he paused and looked back toward the table. For a moment, Grant thought he might say something human, something brother-shaped, a memory maybe. An apology half swallowed, but Callum only adjusted the collar of his immaculate coat. I hope you understand, he said, that pride is expensive. Ines looked at him from the head of the table, pale but upright. So is betrayal, she said. Callum left without another word. Martin followed, but slower. At the threshold, he turned to Ines. I'll send copies of my photographs, he said quietly. All of them, not just the ones he selected. Callum, already outside, called, Martin. Martin stepped out and shut the door. For several seconds, no one moved. Then Priscilla let out a breath that sounded older than she was. Well, she said, I'd call that a successful meeting, except my idea of success usually includes pie and fewer reptiles. Ines closed the folder in front of her. Her hand trembled once. Grant saw it. He did not mention it. Priscilla saw it too and pretended not to, which was sometimes the highest form of mercy in that kitchen. The afternoon passed in the strange exhaustion after a fight. No one had technically won. Grant helped carry folders back to the sideboard when asked. Priscilla made soup and insulted it preemptively in case anyone else intended to. Ines went to the porch twice, not to check the road, Grant thought, but to stand where she could see the barn, the sheep, the fields, the proof that home remained exactly where Callum had tried to turn it into evidence. By evening, the temperature dropped hard. The sky cleared enough to show a few cold stars above Briar Pass. The ranch settled into its night noises, wood contracting, sheep shifting, wind finding small places to complain. Grant had returned to his rescue truck after supper, but Priscilla insisted he take a bowl wrapped in towels and a second thermos of coffee. Do not argue, she said. I am fragile from legal combat. Ines looked at her sharply. Priscilla waved one hand. Emotionally fragile. Don't start. But she looked tired. Too tired. Grant noticed the way she paused before sitting, how she breathed through her nose as if measuring each inhale. Echo noticed too. The dog lay in the mudroom with his eyes fixed on her chair until Priscilla pointed at him. You are not my conscience, she said. Echo did not blink. Grant slept badly in the truck, not because of the cold. The blanket was warm, and Echo had curled on the seat beside him with the solemn commitment of a creature who believed shared body heat was sacred law. Grant slept badly because the day kept replaying in fragments. Ines opening folders. Callum saying pride was expensive. Evelyn Hart's voice slicing through legal fog. Priscilla's hand hovering near her chest. At some point after midnight, Echo rose. Grant opened his eyes instantly. The dog stood rigid in the dark cab, ears high, head turned toward the barn. No growl. Not yet. Only listening. "What is it?" Grant whispered. Echo gave one low, sharp bark. Then another. He leapt down as soon as Grant opened the door and ran toward the barn. Grant followed, pulling on his jacket without fully zipping it. The air outside struck cold enough to burn his throat. The yard lay silver under moonlight. The house was dark except for one dim lamp near the kitchen. Echo reached the barn door, then spun back toward the house, barking hard now. Not a warning to strangers, a warning to family. The sound tore through the night. A porch light came on. Ines opened the door, coat thrown over her nightclothes, hair loose around her face. Priscilla appeared behind her, wrapped in a shawl. "What?" Ines called. Grant was already near the barn when he smelled it. Faint. Rotten egg sharp beneath the cold. He stopped. His eyes went to the sheep pen. The flock had crowded to the far corner away from the barn wall, restless and packed too tight. One ewe stamped. Another bleated in short bursts. From near the propane heater line came a thin, almost delicate hiss. Grant's body became very calm. That kind of calm had frightened younger men once. It was the calm of everything unnecessary leaving. "Ines," he said, voice firm but not loud. "Take Priscilla to the far side of the house, now. Don't turn anything on. No switches, no flame." Ines froze only a fraction of a second. Then she moved. "What is it?" Priscilla asked, already breathless. "Propane," Grant said. "Move." Echo ran to the porch, barked once, then circled behind the women as if herding them away from the barn. He did not nip or push, he made the air behind them urgent. Grant backed away from the barn, radio in hand. "Captain Ellis, this is Michaels at Whitcomb Ranch. Possible propane leak at barn heater line. Evacuating occupants. Need fire response, utility tech, and medical standby." Static crackled. Then Ellis answered, fully awake. "Copy. Keep clear. Units rolling." Grant moved to Ines and Priscilla near the far side of the house. Ines had one arm around Priscilla now, not because Priscilla wanted it, but because refusing would have been foolish, even by Whitcomb standards. The older woman's face had gone pale gray in the porch light. Her hand pressed against her upper chest. "I'm fine," she tried. "No," Ines said, and the word broke slightly. Priscilla blinked at her. Grant lowered his voice. "Priscilla, sit here. I do not enjoy being managed. You can complain while sitting." That worked. She sat on the porch bench near the far rail, away from the barn. Grant wrapped the wool blanket around her shoulders and checked her breathing without making a performance of it. He did not pretend to be a doctor. He did what he knew: warmth, calm, space, observation, communication. "Ines," he said, "call Dr. Naomi Bell. Tell her chest tightness, cold exposure, stress event. Ask her to coordinate with incoming medical." Ines's face went tight, but she took out her phone. Priscilla looked offended. "I said after today." "It is after today," Grant said. Despite everything, a tiny, miserable laugh escaped her. Echo sat in front of Priscilla, close enough that the blanket brushed his shoulder. His eyes remained fixed on her face. This time she did not scold him. The emergency lights arrived first as red pulses through the trees, turning the snowfield into something unreal. Fire response from Briar Pass came in a smaller winter-capable truck, followed by Captain Ellis and a utility technician named Roy Bender, a round-faced man in a heavy insulated coat who moved with the weary competence of someone who had been called from bed many times by other people's bad luck. Roy confirmed the leak near the old propane line feeding the barn heater. The valve assembly had failed at a worn connection, worsened by cold stress and age. He shut the supply at the tank and began ventilation procedures while the fire crew kept everyone back. No flames, no blast, no grand spectacle, only danger found early enough to remain quiet. That was its own miracle. Dr. Naomi Bell arrived with the medical team 10 minutes later, small and brisk in a dark winter coat over clinic clothes, a knit hat pulled low over black curls. Her eyes went first to Priscilla, then to Grant, then to Ines. What happened? Grant gave the facts in order. Naomi knelt before Priscilla. You and I have had conversations about this. Priscilla sighed. I was hoping you'd forgotten. I write things down. A tragic habit in a doctor. Naomi's expression did not soften. Chest pain? Tightness? Radiating? A little? In what direction? Priscilla hesitated. Ines whispered, Priscilla. The older woman looked away. Left shoulder. Naomi's voice stayed calm, but her hands moved faster. We're taking you in for evaluation. I have soup on the stove. The soup will have to face life without you. Priscilla looked at Grant. She's always been this bossy. Grant said, Good. The medical crew helped Priscilla toward the vehicle. Ines followed halfway, then stopped when Roy Bender approached from the barn, carrying a clipboard and an old service tag in a plastic sleeve. Ms. Whitcomb? He asked. Ines turned. Roy looked uncomfortable. I need to show you something. Grant stepped closer, but not ahead. Roy held out the tag. This valve was flagged 3 weeks ago during a routine fuel service. Unsafe, immediate repair recommended. Notice was emailed to the account contact. Ines took the paper. Her face changed. Account contact? She asked. Roy checked the clipboard. Callum Whitcomb? The night seemed to draw tight around them. Grant looked toward the dark road where Callum's SUV had vanished hours earlier. Roy continued, careful now. I can't speak to intent, but the recommendation was sent and marked received. Repair wasn't authorized. Ines stared at the page. No one had to say what it meant. Callum had not created the cold. He had not opened the valve with his own hand. He had not planned a midnight emergency like some villain in a cheap story. But he had known. He had seen the warning, weighed it against his argument that the ranch was unsafe, and let delay become a weapon. That was worse in a quieter way. It was not hatred with fire in its hands. It was greed with paperwork. Behind them, Naomi's team settled Priscilla into the medical vehicle. Echo stood near the open door, whining once, low in his throat. Priscilla reached a hand from beneath the blanket and touched the air above his head. Don't look at me like that, she said weakly. I'm still not knitting you a dignified hat. Echo licked her fingers. Then the door closed. The vehicle began moving down the cleared track toward the pass, lights washing red over the snow. Ines stood watching until it disappeared behind the pines. She did not cry. Grant thought perhaps she had gone beyond crying for the moment. Her body was trembling, but not only from cold. Anger moved through her like a second weather system, deep and violent, and held in check by sheer will. Grant took off his rescue jacket. He stepped toward her, then stopped. The motion felt familiar, too familiar. A man sees a woman shivering. A man covers her shoulders. A man calls it kindness. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it is another unasked decision, small but still unasked. Grant held the jacket in both hands. Ines, he said. She turned toward him. Snowlight caught in her eyes. The metal frame of her prosthetic shone faintly beneath her coat. Behind her, the barn sat dark and safe for now, the sheep murmuring beyond its walls, alive because a dog had read what humans missed. Grant's voice was low. "May I?" Ines looked at the jacket, then at him. The question seemed to reach her more deeply than the warmth would have. All day she had defended the right to speak for herself. All night danger had demanded speed, but even now, in cold and shock, Grant had remembered to ask. For a long moment she said nothing. Then she nodded. "Yes?" He placed the jacket around her shoulders carefully, not as a claim, not as a rescue, as permission honored. Ines pulled the edges together with one hand. The fabric was too large on her, smelling faintly of snow, leather, engine oil, and Echo's fur. She looked toward the road again. "He knew," she said. Grant did not soften the truth. "Yes." "He let us live beside it." "Yes." Her mouth trembled once, then steadied. "For land?" Grant stood beside her, close enough that the cold between them felt shared, far enough that the grief remained hers. Echo came to Ines's other side and sat. The three of them faced the dark road where the medical lights had vanished, while behind them the old barn breathed out the danger it had held in its walls. Above Briar Pass the stars had come out hard and bright. They looked less like comfort than judgment, and under their cold witness, Ines Whitcomb stood wrapped in a jacket she had been asked to accept, watching the night carry her oldest friend toward help and her brother's truth toward morning. By dawn, the propane leak had been sealed, the barn had been aired out, and Briar Pass looked as if nothing had happened. That was one of winter's cruel little tricks. Morning could come clean and blue over a place that had nearly broken apart in the dark. Snow smoothed every footprint. Frost glittered on the fence rails. The sheep breathed warm clouds into the pale air, innocent as saints and just as uninterested in human paperwork. But inside Ines Whitcomb, nothing had been smoothed over. Priscilla Moore had been taken to the regional hospital before first light. Dr. Naomi Bell had gone with the medical team as far as the lower pass, then called twice before sunrise with updates. Priscilla was stable, not fine, despite her lifelong campaign on behalf of that word. Stable. The doctors had found a heart condition that needed treatment, medication, and rest. Real rest, not the kind where Priscilla sat down for 12 minutes while reorganizing a tax file and insulting the soup. It had been caught in time, Naomi said. That was the blessing. But it was also a warning written in the body's own red ink. Ines listened to the update in the kitchen, one hand pressed flat on the pine table. Grant stood near the stove, silent. Echo lay by the mudroom, but his eyes stayed on Ines. The dog had slept little. Every time the house shifted in the night, his ears had lifted. Every time Ines moved toward the window to look down the dark road, he had raised his head as if asking whether he should follow. After Naomi finished speaking, Ines lowered the phone. "She knew," Ines said. Grant did not ask what she meant. She knew something was wrong and hid it. He waited. Ines looked toward Priscilla's empty chair. Her cardigan still hung over the back, one sleeve drooping like an arm too tired to lift. Her pencil lay beside the ledger, sharpened to a dangerous point. A mug of coffee sat untouched near the stove, gone cold. "She kept telling me she was fine," Ines said. Grant looked at the old wooden mailbox beneath the window, then at the table where the paperwork from yesterday still rested in neat, exhausted stacks. "People do that," he said. Ines gave a small, humorless breath. "Yes, apparently everyone in this house has been trying to win a championship." Outside, Echo's rescued ewe bleated from the barn, sharp and ordinary, demanding breakfast as if the world had no respect for emotional aftermath. Ines closed her eyes, then she opened them and stood. "Feed first," she said. Grant almost objected. Almost. Instead, he nodded. "Tell me what needs doing." That was the shape of the next hours. Not dramatic. Not easy. The fire crew returned once to confirm the barn was safe to approach. Roy Bender, the propane technician, came back in daylight with a replacement valve assembly and the grave expression of a man who had seen one neglected repair become too many bad stories. He worked carefully, then showed Ines exactly what he had done, where the shutoff sat, and what paperwork would follow. He also gave her a copy of the earlier notice. It sat on the kitchen table like a dead moth. Sent to Callum Whitcomb. Received. No repair authorized. Roy did not add judgment. He did not need to. Sometimes the plainest document carried the loudest accusation. By mid-morning, Marla Keene called. Her voice sounded different from the day before. Still crisp, still professional, but colder now in a way that had nothing to do with Montana weather. She had reviewed the service records, the photographs Martin Quaid had sent, and the propane warning Callum had failed to include in his earlier report. "Ms. Whitcomb," Marla said, "I owe you a correction." Ines stood at the kitchen counter with the phone on speaker. Grant sat across the room because he had not been invited into the call. Echo rested at Ines's feet, eyes half closed. Marla continued. "The risk information provided to me by your brother was incomplete. Significantly incomplete. The photographs emphasized conditions without maintenance context. The propane notice changes the timeline and the nature of the concern." Priscilla would have loved that sentence, Grant thought. She would have found a way to frame it and hang it over Callum's preferred chair. Ines said, "What does that mean?" "It means I'll be updating my notes. I'll recommend a full review based on current evidence, including the fact that a required repair notice was received by a trust beneficiary and not acted upon. I can't speak for legal conclusions. But from an insurance standpoint, selective reporting is a serious concern." Ines looked at the notice on the table. "Thank you," she said. Her voice did not sound victorious. It sounded older. Later, Evelyn Hart called as well. The local attorney's voice carried the calm weight of winter stone. "Ines," she said, "I won't pretend this ends the trust issue, but it changes Callum's position. If he tries to argue operational neglect, he will have to answer for withholding repair information. That matters. Can he still force a sale?" Force is a strong word. Pressure, perhaps. Litigation, perhaps. But his clean story is gone. Ines looked toward the window. Beyond it, the barn stood repaired and scarred, old as an oath. "I'm tired of clean stories," she said. Evelyn was quiet for a moment. "Most family stories aren't clean. They're just edited by whoever talks first." When the call ended, Grant expected Ines to sit. She did not. She took the propane notice, Callum's selected photographs, Martin's full file, and Marla's updated email, and placed them all in one folder. Then she wrote on the tab in careful block letters. Truth, uncomfortable, but organized. Grant read it from across the room. "That looks like Priscilla's influence," he said. Ines's mouth moved, not a full smile. Something near it. She would say the folder lacks punctuation. She would be right. For the first time that day, Ines laughed. Only once, but it was real enough to warm the kitchen more than the stove. They drove to the hospital that afternoon when the pass road opened under restricted travel. Grant used the rescue truck because it could handle the icy bends and because Ines allowed it, after confirming 3 times that his tires were not decorative city nonsense. Echo came in the back seat, lying down until they reached the hospital lot, then lifting his head as if the building itself required inspection. Priscilla was in a small room on the 2nd floor, tucked under too many blankets and wearing an expression of royal offense. "I have been imprisoned by people with clipboards," she announced when Ines entered. Ines crossed the room too quickly, then slowed herself before reaching the bed. Grant remained near the door with Echo because hospital rooms were small and dignity needed space. Dr. Naomi Bell stood beside the monitor, sleeves rolled under her white coat, dark curls escaping her clip. She looked tired, but satisfied in the way doctors sometimes did when trouble had been caught before it became tragedy. "You scared me," Ines said. Priscilla sniffed. That is an unkind accusation toward a woman who has been served soup that tastes like dishwater prayed over by an exhausted nun. Grant looked at Naomi. Naomi said, "She's been saying that for 20 minutes. It's important medical feedback, Priscilla insisted. Ines stared at her. Then she laughed. Not the hidden sliver Grant had seen in the barn. Not the dry, defensive sound she used when humor was safer than tenderness. This laugh broke out of her suddenly, uneven and bright, and for a second the hospital room changed. The machines seemed less cold. The window seemed wider. Even Echo, who was not allowed fully inside until Naomi gave a cautious nod, wagged his tail against Grant's leg. Priscilla's eyes softened. There she is. Ines took her hand. "You should have told me," she said. "I did not want you worrying." "I worry anyway. You only deprived me of accurate information." Priscilla glanced at Grant. "She's been spending too much time with folders." Grant said, "Folders save lives." "Do not encourage her." Naomi explained the diagnosis plainly. Medication, follow-up, rest, reduced exertion for a while, no heavy lifting, no shoveling, no dramatic marches across icy porches to prove points to dogs. Priscilla objected to the last one. Naomi ignored her. Echo was finally allowed near the bed. He approached with unusual softness, his paws quiet on the hospital floor. He rested his chin on the blanket near Priscilla's hand. She looked down at him. "Don't start with me," she whispered. Echo closed his eyes. Priscilla's fingers moved into the fur behind his ear. No one mentioned that she did not pull away. Ines watched, and Grant saw the old armor in her face loosen by another small, dangerous inch. Love frightened her more than conflict sometimes. Conflict had rules. Love had entrances no one could fully guard. On the drive back, Ines sat beside Grant in the truck, quiet. Echo slept in the back after conducting his hospital duties with solemn excellence. The road wound through white pines and open fields, the late sun pouring gold over the snow as if the world had been cracked open and honey had spilled through. Ines did not speak until they were near the ranch. "I don't forgive Callum." Grant kept both hands on the wheel. "I didn't ask." "I know." A long silence. "I'm saying it because people expect forgiveness to arrive like a curtain at the end of a play." Grant glanced at her. She looked out at the fields. "I don't hate him. That would be simpler. I remember him small. I remember him asleep on wool bags in the old barn. I remember him crying when a lamb died one spring and pretending he had dust in his eyes." Her voice thinned, but it did not break. "And now I remember him seeing a warning that could have hurt Priscilla, could have hurt all of us, and deciding it was useful." Grant said nothing because nothing clean belonged there. Ines continued, "I won't let him make the ranch into a wound I have to stare at every day." That sounds wise. It sounds exhausting. That too. She looked at him then, and for once the grief did not hide behind sharpness. "What about you?" Grant knew what she meant without asking. He thought of Captain Ellis offering him more winter shifts in Briar Pass after the pass reopened. He thought of the old trailer behind the rescue station, dented, cold, but repairable. He thought of all the places he had left before they could ask him to stay. He thought of Miles Arlen's patch tucked in his notebook, of Nathaniel Cross's lesson returning through a dead man's letters, of Echo pressing his head against his knee whenever memory tried to drag him elsewhere. "I took more shifts," he said. Ines did not answer immediately. "At the rescue station?" "Yes, through winter." "That's not far." "No." "Trailer still leaks?" "Several places." "You know how to fix leaks?" "On good days?" "Good." He waited. She looked forward through the windshield. The north fence will need checking after the next melt. I can do that if you want. I didn't ask yet. I know. Another silence. Then, quieter, she said, I may. Grant nodded. It was not romance declared beneath a swelling sky. It was not a promise tied with music and certainty. It was smaller, humbler, and truer, a possible ask, a possible answer. A door unlatched 1 inch. In the days that followed, the ranch did not become easy. Real life rarely respected endings. Priscilla came home with instructions, medication, and a level of irritation that suggested recovery would be supervised by sarcasm. She was forbidden from heavy chores, so she established herself in a chair near the kitchen window and ruled the house with a pencil, a blanket over her knees, and Echo stationed at her feet like a furry bailiff. If anyone lifts more than they should, she told him, you bark once for foolishness, twice for felony. Echo seemed to accept the assignment. Marla Keene sent her revised report. Evelyn Hart began the process of formally challenging Callum's pressure tactics within the trust. Martin Quaid delivered copies of every photograph he had taken, including the ones Callum hadn't wanted shown. Images of repaired rails, labeled equipment, gravel bins, feed systems, and Ines working safely with practiced competence. He included a brief written statement that his initial observations had been presented without full operational context. He was not a hero. But in the end, he refused to remain a sharpened tool in someone else's hand. Callum did not return to the ranch. He sent one email through Evelyn. It was stiff, defensive, full of phrases like miscommunication and unfortunate timing. Ines read it once, printed it, placed it in the folder marked Truth, uncomfortable but organized, and made no reply that day. Forgiveness, if it ever came, would not be forced into a schedule for his comfort. Grant moved into the old trailer behind the rescue station a week later. Moved into was perhaps too generous a phrase. He repaired the door, patched the roof seam, fixed the heater, and brought in one duffel, a toolbox, Echo's blanket, and the waterproof notebook that held Miles Arlen's gray mountain patch. The place smelled of dust, old vinyl, and possibility. It was not home, not yet. But it was not another place to leave before morning either. He began stopping by Whitcomb Ranch on agreed days, not drifting in, not appearing like weather. Agreed days, Tuesdays after morning rescue check-in, Fridays if the road report looked bad, after heavy wind if Ines called. Sometimes she did, sometimes she did not. Both mattered. Echo, meanwhile, acted as if the ranch had always been part of his kingdom. He lay outside the lambing pen with the seriousness of a small, mythic guardian, accepting investigation from curious lambs and ignoring the jealous stare of the oldest ewe. He walked beside Ines when she asked, slow enough to match her gait, independent enough not to hover. He slept in front of Priscilla's chair when she returned from follow-up visits, enduring her complaints about shedding with the dignity of a saint in fur. At night, when Grant's old memories returned, as they did because healing did not erase the dead, Echo placed his head on Grant's knee. No command, no cure, just the ancient language of staying. And gradually, Grant learned to stay back. That was harder than staying near. On a clear morning, 2 weeks after the propane leak, Briar Pass woke under a sky washed clean and pale blue. The storm tracks had softened. Sunlight spread thin across the wooden rails. The barn steamed faintly where warm animal breath met cold air. New valve hardware gleamed near the propane line, tagged and dated. The feed path had been sanded. The old mailbox sat beneath the kitchen window, catching a square of light on its scorched corner. Ines came out wearing her brown canvas coat, and the brick-red scarf Priscilla had insisted made her look less like a weather warning and more like a person who owns jam. Her prosthetic foot found the packed path with steady familiarity. She pulled a feed bag onto the small sled, a size she had chosen because strength did not require foolish math. Grant stood near the barn door. He wore his olive combat shirt under the orange and black rescue jacket, hands loose at his sides. The old red carabiner hung at his belt. Once he might have stepped forward already. Once he would have made the world safer without asking whether safety had begun to sound like doubt. Now he watched the path. Not her leg. The path. Echo walked near the sheep, guiding them away from the feed area with gentle arcs. A lamb broke from the cluster and pressed its nose into the thick fur of his neck. Echo paused, patient as winter stone warmed by sun. From the porch, Priscilla stood wrapped in a blue coat and scarf, one hand on the rail, the other holding a mug Naomi would probably disapprove of. "You two are so stubborn," she called. Winter has started going around the long way just to avoid conversation. Ines did not look back. "You're supposed to be resting." "I am resting loudly." "That's not a medical category." "It should be." Grant smiled. Ines pulled the sled across the yard. The runners whispered over packed snow. Halfway to the barn, the sled caught on a ridge of ice. Grant's body leaned forward a fraction before he stopped it. Ines saw. So did Priscilla. So, unfortunately, did Echo. The dog looked at Grant with one ear lifted, as if preparing a full moral lecture in silence. Grant held up both hands. Ines adjusted her stance, shifted the rope, and freed the sled with one firm pull. It slid cleanly after that. She reached the barn threshold, guided the bag down, and stood for a moment breathing hard, color high in her cheeks. Grant remained where he was, available, uninvited. That, he was beginning to understand, was not uselessness. It was respect with work boots on. Ines looked over at him. "You're still here?" she said. Her voice held no accusation, no surprise exactly, something more dangerous than both. Wonder. Grant looked at the repaired barn, the new propane tag, the sheep shifting in warm clouds, Priscilla on the porch, Echo among the flock like a scrap of loyal sunlight. Then he looked at Ines Whitcomb standing straight in the snow, not softened by what had happened, not hardened beyond reach either. A woman with one real leg, one engineered leg, and a spine no one had lent her. A woman who did not need a throne to look like some old winter goddess guarding her valley. Grant felt the old road inside him, the one that always led away, go quiet. "Yeah," he said. "This time I'm not moving on." Ines held his gaze. Then she nodded toward the door. "You can hold that open." Grant stepped forward. Only then. He held the barn door while she pulled the sled through. Echo slipped in after the sheep. Priscilla complained from the porch that nobody appreciated the dramatic chill entering the house. The sun climbed higher over Briar Pass, turning the snowfields bright enough to make the whole world squint. And no one carried Ines across the threshold of her own life. No one needed to. Love, Grant was learning, was not always a rescue line thrown from above. Sometimes it was a hand kept close without closing around the rope. Sometimes it was asking before offering warmth. Sometimes it was standing beside a person while they took their own hard step, trusting that dignity was not the enemy of safety. In a land white with winter, among sheep, old wood, stubborn women, and one quiet German shepherd, Grant Michaels finally understood what Echo had known all along. The strongest loyalty did not pull. It stayed. Sometimes love does not arrive as someone carrying the weight for us. Sometimes it comes as a quiet presence beside us, asking permission before helping, staying close without taking away our dignity. Ines, Grant, Priscilla, and Echo remind us that strength is not pretending we never need anyone. True strength is knowing when to stand, when to ask, and when to let grace meet us in the cold. Maybe today, someone in your life does not need to be rescued. Maybe they only need to know you are near. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us where you're watching from, and subscribe to help True Seal Dog Stories reach more people who still believe in loyalty, healing, and small miracles. May peace find you where you are, and may you never walk through the storm alone.